I grew up in Paris, Missouri. It's just a really small town, lots of farms. Everybody kind of knows everybody. It's just a very small, rural community.
In the summer of 1994, 22-year-old Melanie Shepard is leading a hectic life, leaving her little time for romance.
I was going to school at College of the Ozarks. I was studying education. I wanted to be an English teacher. I was just really busy going to school and working. I was a cashier at a convenience store. I really didn't date that much.
Everything changes when a 28-year-old mechanic walks into the store one night. His name is James Addy.
There was a long line of people, and he was trying to check out, and he kind of yelled up to the front of the line, "Will you hurry up?" And I just kind of gave it right back to him. I said, "I'm doing the best I can." And he said, "Well, I'm cooking barbecue at my house." And I said, "I don't get any, I don't care." So later that night, he brought me some barbecue. And that's kind of how we met. I thought it was very sweet that he would go out of his way to do that for me. It was very nice. On a busy night, it was a nice surprise.
James returns to the store a week later, and this time, he's not buying groceries.
He asked me to come over, and that was our first date. He cooked supper for me. The food was good, and he's feeding me a lot. So that was kind of fun. We got to know each other pretty well, pretty fast. We both really liked each other. He just seemed like the kind of person that could take care of me and take care of himself and take care of a family. He seemed like husband material. Just a total package, you know?
Not long after they start dating, James drops a bombshell.
He shares with her that he's been married 3 times. So that's kind of shocking for Melanie. 3 times by 28, that's a lot.
He said they were cheaters. They were unfaithful and not good people. They were just gold diggers and trying to take advantage of him and of his good nature and his goodwill.
Despite this awkward beginning, 6 months into the relationship, things are getting serious, and James pops the question.
They were sitting on the couch talking, and he just sort of blurted out, "Will you marry me?"
I said, yes, of course. At that age, you want fairy tales and romance and happy endings. It was fun going to pick out a ring and being engaged. Felt like a grown-up. I felt very confident that I was with a good person. I was with the right person, and he wanted the same things that I did.
In the spring of 1995, James and Melanie get married. The newlyweds seem destined for a happy family life and soon welcome 2 kids.
Just had our perfect little family, 1 boy and 1 girl. I am a nurturing person, and I want to take care of my kids, and I want to take care of my husband, and I want to take care of my house. I think he saw that, yeah, that would work. That would work for him. That would work as a wife and good partner in life. I think that's what he wanted. He was a strong person. He was the protector and very capable of handling life. He was definitely the leader of the family. He took care of business.
In 2004, James takes on a higher-paying job as a prison guard, 30 miles away at the Moberly Correctional Center.
He really liked his job. He really did well in his job. He had no problem telling people what to do or being that aggressive person if he had to be. He could keep people in line. I think it was a real ego boost for him to have people listen to him and jump when he said jump. And then he expected it to happen at home, too. He wanted to have someone just follow along with whatever he said. It was tough because I'm not a prisoner. He didn't like that I had my own opinions, and he would get upset.
After 8 years of marriage and with her children now in school, Melanie looks to pursue her teaching career. But James puts his foot down.
He didn't want me to work. He didn't want me to go back to school. He kept saying, oh no, you need to stay at home. You need to stay at home. He just didn't want me out in the world and, come home and talk about my coworkers and talk about my job. He didn't want that. He wanted me to be focused solely on him. And he got very upset with me. He said I don't support him, and it was a big problem. It was a huge fight. That was very unexpected. I thought we were a team. I thought, we were building this life together, and I was supposed to just leave everything behind and just be his wife now. I didn't like that.
The arguments only get worse. For someone who craves control, James starts losing it.
He could get so mad that he would be threatening and intimidating and throw things. I can remember going through a lot of salt and pepper shakers. I would always just stand there because I don't want to be intimidated. I don't like that feeling. I don't like backing down from that.
11 years into the marriage and desperate for a sense of independence, Melanie finally defies James.
I started working. I was a substitute teacher, which was perfect while the kids were in school. It felt like this is where I should be. This is what I wanted to do. And it was nice to get out. I always said I liked being a stay-at-home mom, but I liked when it ended too. I liked a new thing to do.
For James, I think it was probably very scary. She has priorities and parts of her life that don't center around him anymore. I think at this point in time, James realizes that maybe Melanie is not going to be the submissive wife that he wants.
6 years into his job at the prison, James's work has strangely become all-consuming, and he disappears for longer lengths of time.
He would leave about 5:30 in the morning. It only takes 45 minutes to get there. So he left pretty early. And then he wouldn't get home till about 5 at night. That's 2 hours after his shift ended. I would just question him, why are you always so late? And he was angry with me. He's like, why can't you leave me alone? He would just say, well, I stopped and talked to people, or I went to get gas. Sometimes he'd have to wait on a train to go by. He had all these little excuses. So it was just odd.
There's a reason James is spending longer hours away from home, and it has nothing to do with work. He's spending more and more time with one of the other guards. Her name is Molly Watson.
Molly wanted to get a job that could make pretty good money that she could save back for her and her son, so she could go back to school. And so she started out at the Moberly prison. Her ultimate goal was to be a psychologist.
Molly needs the money, as she's a single mom, raising her son on her own.
Molly was a really good mom. She gave him all the love in the world.
I am very much a huge geek. I hate being called a nerd.
I wanted Molly to find somebody that respected her for her, that treated her like she deserved to be treated,
In 2011, just a year into her new job, Molly has started dating someone new, and she's excited to introduce him to her brother.
When I first met him, I just kind of looked at him and I was like, hi, I'm Tim. And he's just like, yeah, I'm James. And he put his head down. Just something about him, I didn't like him from the get-go. He was very standoffish. He would never look you in the eye to talk to you. He didn't really seem to care.
James's off-putting demeanor likely raised questions as to who he was, what were his intentions, and really, what was he hiding?
Just something was off about him. I knew there's something not right about this guy.
In 2011, Melanie and James Addy have been married for 16 years. Across town, Molly Watson has fallen hard for the same James Addy.
She adored him. She doted on him. She loved him unconditionally. She made James her #1 priority, and that's what James was looking for. He wanted somebody who put him first, always.
Molly's family is less than impressed with this new man in her life, who's 16 years her senior.
Molly told me he was in the process of getting a divorce, for 6 years, that he had like 2 kids.
He says that he's trying to be there for his kids and do what's best for them, so he's still living with his estranged wife.
I thought that was weird, I've been divorced and I wouldn't live with my ex-wife.
James visits Molly almost every day after work at her parents' house. They spend all their time together in her bedroom.
Molly is living at home with her parents. She's very close with her family. He's not making any attempts to really build a relationship with them. And so it just seems like there's secrets and there's something that's just not right.
He would try to keep her away from everybody. James would try to separate Molly from her son. You could always tell that he did not want Molly's son in their life at all. My dad didn't like him. My mom flat out told me, I don't like the guy. And it killed me to watch my sister keep dating him because, I knew she could do better.
Molly is so enamored with James, she brushes her family's concerns aside.
She was in love. Love is blind, and in her case, that's the truth. You could point out things to her that were obvious, and she would deny it.
In 2016, 5 years into their relationship, Molly and James take their first trip together.
He received a phone call from one of his friends. He got off the phone and I said, "What was that about?" And he said, "Oh, he wants me to go to Mexico with him."
Melanie encourages him to go with his coworkers and have a good time. In reality, James wasn't going with coworkers. He was going to Mexico with Molly, his secret girlfriend. For Molly, this was amazing. She wanted to go on a vacation with James so badly. She was madly in love with him, and this was just an opportunity for them to grow their relationship and spend more time together.
It looked like when they started to go on vacation that they were more committed to each other. Like he was maybe getting serious about it. We've had the doubts about him, but okay. Maybe this is good.
When James returns home a week later, Melanie notices something odd about his photos.
I said, "Well, where are the other people that you went with?" And he said, "Oh, I don't want pictures of them." So there was only pictures of him and the resort and the beach. And that's all I saw.
A year later, unbeknownst to Melanie, James takes her to the same vacation spot where he took Molly.
It was so nice. We just had each other and we spent all our time together, and it was a great trip. We had so much fun.
At this point, James has been carrying on this double life for so long that he's gotten so used to it and comfortable, to the point where he's arrogant enough to take his wife on the same vacation he took his mistress.
In October 2017, when James lies and tells Molly his divorce is finalized, she's ready to take the next step.
The only thing she told me about the proposal was that she'd asked James to marry her, and he said yes. Molly looked really happy and could tell that she was ready to get married.
Now he's got to figure out what he's going to do because he still has a wife.
Molly quickly busies herself prepping for her dream wedding. She picks April 29th, 2018 as the date, and she's planning to hold it at the Stony Creek Hotel, where Samantha Cohen is their wedding planner.
She had a smile on her face the entire time we would meet. She just had, this look in her eye of like, this is my day, I'm so excited, let's make this happen. She wanted to be the princess for the day. Every girl imagines their wedding day and wanting to be the bride or the princess walking down the aisle.
That's what she wanted, find Prince Charming, settle down happily ever after. But I thought, what's she thinking, she don't want to marry this guy. Nothing good can come of it.
During the Christmas holidays, just a few months before the wedding is to take place, James shares some devastating news with Molly.
He tells Molly that his ex-wife Melanie has been in a terrible car accident. She's actually on life support. And he needs to be there for his children and to help them with the care of their mother.
Molly felt bad for James, told him, if he needed her to back off any, and give him some space, she would, and that she was there for him, whatever he needed, that she understood he was doing it for his kids. I think it made Molly feel guilty about the wedding coming up.
Is Melanie's supposed accident a strategy for James to get out of the wedding? Melanie, in fact, is alive and well, for now. But soon, she will come perilously close to death.
There's this really strong gas smell in our bedroom.
I believe that Melanie was at a very high risk of being killed.
To think that you're so close to losing your life, it's terrifying. It was late at night, midnight, 1 o'clock. I woke up and I smelled gas. It was very, very strong in the bedroom. I thought, well, this is not dissipating, this is not normal. And Jim wasn't there. He wasn't in our bed, he wasn't in the bathroom. So I got up and I went to find Jim to tell him that there's this really strong gas smell.
She goes downstairs and she finds that all the windows and doors are closed.
Jim wasn't anywhere in the house. And I thought, this could be serious. This particular night, he was outside on the deck, smoking a cigarette. It was unusual for him to be outside smoking. He would usually just smoke in the dining room at the window. So I told him, I said, really strong gas smell, I don't know what it is. He said, okay, well, you stay out here. And he went back in the bedroom and opened the windows and just said, I don't know, it's probably some farm equipment outside.
But it's a little suspicious because the windows are closed, and when she goes outside, she doesn't have this overpowering odor anymore.
Eventually, the smell did go away, and I was able to go back to bed, so I don't have an explanation for that. It was so strange.
While Melanie worries about James and his odd behavior, Molly Watson is blissfully anticipating her fairy tale wedding. After 7 years of dating James, her dream is finally coming true.
Her excitement was so palpable. I mean, you watch her videos and she just radiates excitement and love.
Hi everyone, it's Molly, and here is the dress on me, and I have to say I was actually really impressed.
You can tell just by talking to her, she has always dreamt of her wedding. I mean, she had 3 wedding dresses. Like, this was not just any normal day in her life. She's been dreaming of how this wedding was gonna look for years. I think she finally found, her Prince Charming, and this was the next chapter of her life.
Molly seems unaware that James lacks the same enthusiasm, but his detached demeanor is obvious to others.
When I was meeting with James and Molly, it was all Molly giving the input. He really just sat there kind of staring off into space. He was a very quiet man, didn't smile often, and just kind of was there. He didn't really give much input into the conversations, and he just didn't seem like he really wanted to be there. He didn't seem to care.
He said, oh, well, we're getting married, as long as it shuts her up, whatever. That's kind of his attitude towards it.
On April 22nd, just a week before the wedding, James drops another bombshell about his supposed ex-wife.
We were told she was in this coma, and they determined that she would never recover from her injuries. From what Molly told me directly, Melanie's life support, they were going to go ahead and pull the plug because they decided that she was too brain damaged and that they were going to have to just let her go.
I, reached out to Molly to get a final in-person meeting scheduled with her and James, and she had emailed me back saying, I don't know if James will be able to make the meeting as his ex-wife had just passed away that weekend before.
James is lying, and Melanie is still very much alive, unbeknownst to Molly and everyone else around her.
I think James wanted so badly to get out of this predicament he had created that he was hoping by creating this tragic situation and backstory that maybe Molly would come to the conclusion to cancel the wedding, and that would sort of be his get out of jail free card. But that's not what happened. He needed to keep up the charade as the loving fiance, and so he doesn't cancel the wedding because he knows that's going to devastate her.
2 days before the wedding, James still hasn't told Molly the truth.
That Friday when he came in by himself after dropped everything off and paid, I asked him, how are you feeling? And the only words that he said was that she was driving him crazy.
It's probably pretty common for grooms to be a little annoyed with brides as it gets close to the wedding. But for James, I think Molly was driving him crazy because he knew the walls were closing in. He was still married to Melanie, and he had to figure something out quickly.
The night of April 27th, Molly abruptly leaves her parents' home without much of an explanation.
She was actually making something to eat when suddenly she got a phone call. And after that phone call, Molly leaves really quickly. And she just sort of rushed out of the house. Given that she was cooking, her parents felt like she would be back really quickly.
At his home, James tells his wife Melanie he's stepping out.
He was out in the garage, and then he came in and said he was going to go to a friend's house. This was about 7 o'clock, and then I went to bed about 7:30. I usually go to bed pretty early.
Later that night, a driver on a deserted road notices something unusual.
He sees these 2 vehicles parked on the side of the road. He figures one of them is having engine trouble, so he stops to see if he can help. An older man tells him that everything's fine, he can go. And so he proceeds on his way. On his way back, he passes the same spot, only this time there's only one vehicle.
The Monroe County Sheriff's Office got a call around 10:30 at night that a passerby named Glenn McSparron had found a woman in a very remote area of Monroe County on a low water crossing. He told police that there was a woman who was laying in front of a car on this dusty, dirty country road. Her eyes were open. She did not appear alive to him.
Investigators rush to the scene.
Police quickly identify the cause of death as a gunshot wound to the head. This woman is out in the middle of nowhere, and she's been shot execution style. It leads them to believe this was a planned murder, and someone lured her out there. And they identify her by finding a marriage license on her passenger seat that identifies her as Molly Watson, who's engaged to be married to James Addy.
In the early hours of April 28th, just one day before Tim Watson's sister is to be married, he gets a call from his dad.
As soon as I saw what time it was, I knew it was something serious. He said, "Timmy, the highway patrol just left our house. They found Molly dead on this dirt road." And immediately I was in shock.
About 2:30 in the morning, I got up and I looked out the window and there were 4 vehicles with flashing lights. I went to the door and Jim was there first. He opened the door for them, these 4 cops. So I asked them, "What's going on? Why are you here?" And nobody would answer me. Finally, somebody asked me, he said, "Who are you?" And I pointed to Jim and said, "Well, I'm his wife." And Jim said, "Yes, that's my wife." And then the mood kind of changed a little bit.
Investigators had no idea what they were walking into. They thought they were making a death notification to a fiancé, and they find out he's already married for 23 years. They discovered Melanie Addy, and everything changed. Suddenly, James Addy, who they expected to be the bereaved fiancé who would surely receive the worst news of his entire life, was now a suspect.
Detectives escort James into the dining room for an interview, while another investigator asks Melanie curious questions.
Where were you tonight? What did you do tonight? Do you know Molly Watson? She's been found dead. I didn't know who that was. I didn't know who Molly was. I didn't know how she was at all related to my family. They told me who Molly was and that they were going to get married. I asked him, do you have the right person? Are you sure you have the right person? Because that's my husband. I was numb. I was in shock. It was hard to get this through my head because this was my husband and this was our life, and this other person had no place in it, and the story did not make sense.
Out of Melanie's earshot, James comes clean to the officers about his relationship with Molly.
He admitted the affair and said that it had been going on for 7 years.
He tells them, though, that he had absolutely nothing to do with Molly's death.
They asked him where he was that evening. James Addy responded that he left the home around 7 o'clock to go visit a friend. He said the friend was not home, so he turned around and came back home and arrived around 8:30 that evening, and that he went to bed shortly thereafter.
Did James go to bed as he claims to police, or did he secretly meet Molly? When forensics examined the bride-to-be's computer, they find evidence to suggest she had been obsessed by one thing in the 24 hours leading up to her death. And it wasn't her wedding.
Molly Watson had been searching for evidence of Melanie Addy's death. She was searching to see if there was an obituary or any evidence of this horrible accident that had eventually led to Melanie's death. Of course, Melanie Addy was very much alive, and she was unable to find any evidence that she had passed away.
Did Molly come to the crushing realization that Melanie was alive and there would be no wedding?
I think she questioned James on it, and at that point, he knew the jig was up and he had to do something.
Back at the murder scene, investigators scour the area and find Molly's cell phone and a discarded t-shirt. Police also go through Molly's phone records and are able to piece together her last known movements.
The last phone call she ever made was 22 minutes long. 22 minutes, which is the exact amount of time it took Molly Watson to drive from her home to her death. The entire time she was on the phone with James Addy.
I think somehow he convinced her to meet up with him so they could talk about it, and he got her out in the middle of nowhere and took her life.
Police looked at the victimology of Molly Watson. Who did she know? Who in her life might want her dead? And they determined that only one person, James Addy, had the motive, means, and opportunity to take Molly's life.
James Addy is arrested and taken into custody. The next day, Melanie starts looking for evidence of James's double life.
I went out to the garage, which was kind of his domain. It was a lot of storage things that we kept up there, a lot of boxes. And I started looking a little closer at the boxes, and these were not my things. These were Molly's things. They had her name on the boxes. And that's when I found the photo album of them on vacation. And a lot of kitchen stuff, just household things that were at my house. She was planning on moving in, I guess. It was very overwhelming. I didn't know how to process this. He was home every night. I don't know when he saw her or how they formed a relationship over 7 years and why he would go forward with marrying her or planning this wedding when he was still married to me. How is this supposed to work? I don't know what he was thinking. I was just angry, just angry.
Melanie thinks back to the night of the gas leak and is left to wonder about James's possible intentions. The thought is chilling.
I started to put all of that together about the gas in the bedroom. I think the idea was for me not to wake up. I think I was supposed to die. I think he was trying to get rid of one of us.
Had James tried to kill Melanie but failed, so he chose Molly instead? James Addy has been arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Molly Watson. A heartbroken Melanie confronts her husband.
I went to the jail a few days after he was arrested and asked him, what the hell? What are you doing? This is our life. And he didn't have any answers. He apologized for the affair. He never admitted that he killed her. He said that he was sorry and he didn't know we had such a perfect life. Too late now. He lost everything and he knew it. He knew everything was gone. He knew I wasn't going to stick around. I was not going to be his support system anymore. This was it. We were done. James's case goes before the court in the spring of 2021.
Prosecutors paint a picture for the jury of what they believe happened that fateful night.
The night of April 27th, I believe that he called Molly Watson and told her to get in her car and start driving to this remote area. She arrived at the low water crossing, opened the door, and he shot her once, and he panicked. He left Molly's body there for anyone to find. Going into the trial, we felt that the evidence against James Addy was overwhelming.
The T-shirt found by police is a key piece of evidence.
In addition to the T-shirt having gunshot residue on it and the victim's blood on it, there was something else important about the T-shirts. That T-shirt had been made by James Addy's daughter, Emma Addy.
And this was specific to Emma. She had made this shirt and kind of messed up the design a little bit.
She was able to identify that T-shirt as one that she had made and given to her father. So the T-shirt was extremely important because we know it came from the crime scene because it had Molly's blood on it. And we know that it came from the defendant's home.
James had told police that on the night of the murder, he'd gone out but was home by 8:30 p.m. His daughter, though, contradicts that story when faced with the daunting task of testifying against her own father.
Emma Addy was interviewed about her father's whereabouts, and she gave a very different story.
I was still up doing homework at around 10 p.m., and that's around the time that Dad came home.
He returns home and sees his daughter Emma still up. He's a little surprised, and Emma described him as being nervous. James gets in the shower right away. And Emma also notices that her dad does laundry, something that would normally be her mom's job.
And did you smell anything? Yes, I smelled bleach.
Emma Addy's testimony was key to dispute the alibi that James Addy had provided to the police. And to be able to come into court and to tell the world that your father lied to the police, it was incredible.
She had a tough job and she handled it. She did really, really well. She's an inspiration to me. She is. She's amazing.
I just plead with the jury to give this monster the max sentence possible.
On April 28th, 2021, what would have been Molly and James' third anniversary had they been married, James Addy is found guilty of Molly's murder.
I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
I just wanted justice for Molly. That's all I cared about. You know, as long as I heard those words guilty come out of the judge's mouth, and thank God they did.
He had the means, he had the motive. He didn't have a good alibi. He wasn't home that night. So it all kind of added up. He's absolutely responsible for this.
James Addy is convicted, but it's still hard to comprehend his sickening actions.
It's unfathomable that James thought the solution to the problem was to kill someone instead of just breaking up with them. In his mind, that was the right thing to do, and that's what's scary. It's terrifying that that is his way out.
Had he walked away, just never talked to her again, we'd be fine with that. You know, she'd be upset. She'd still be here. He chose to take her life. He's an evil person.
It's tragic to think that somebody who was so excited to be a bride and to have a happily ever after instead had this tragic ending.
The family, they're the ones that suffer in this. They are the true victims. They've lost Molly, and they will lose her, you know, at family get-togethers and holidays and vacations, and she's just not there for them.
She definitely knows how much I love her. I would like Molly to be remembered as the sweet, loving, giving person she was. She'd do anything for anybody.
I'd hug her and just say how sorry I am that this happened to her. And I hope she feels that justice has been served. And I hope she's okay.
I still go out to her gravesite and I have conversations with her, and she said everything's fine, everything's okay.
As for Melanie, she has found a semblance of peace in her life.
It's good that it's finally over. I'm divorced and on my own, but I'm much happier on my own than I was married. I'm good all by myself, I really am. I'm just really lucky that I have a good job, a fun job, great coworkers. I have a good life. I'm happy.
The phone rings at 3:11 a.m., the kind of hour that splits a city in half asleep, half holding its breath. Dispatch lights blink like a metronome in the dark, and the voice on the line is thin, trembling, clipped by static and street noise. A woman's scream swallowed by a wind that smells like the harbor. Possible assault, Fort Point Channel, no name. Lots of blood. In the station house, coffee is burned down to bitterness. A sergeant lifts his head. The city lifts its guard. Headlines that haven't been written yet lean forward in their chairs. Cold case, the future whispers. But not tonight. Tonight, everything is still fluid, still warm. Fort Point in 2001 is all brick and echo. The old warehouses, the broken-backed piers, a solitude that creaks when the tide shifts. Officers step from the cruiser and their boots ring off the old iron grates like they're tapping a code. The screamer is gone. A gull wheels overhead, furious and hungry. There's a smear on the railing that could be paint, could be something else until the flashlight slides across it and finds a color you don't talk about at breakfast. A single earring glints at the edge of the planks. Not gold, not cheap, something in between with a scuffed pearl that has never seen the ocean. The kind of detail that makes a detective stop, swallow, and pocket his breath. She is found 10 minutes later against a warehouse door, alive, barely. Eyes open, pupils blown, saying a name that no one recognizes, then another that someone does. Row, row. The rest is wind. The EMTs do their ballet. Cut, press, lift, black gloves moving fast. Pulse weak, siren up. The city watches the red light swipe its face like a razor. She's in the back of the ambulance now, vanishing into the tunnel's mouth. Row. Still nothing. The door slams. The echo keeps talking. They mark the scene. Cones where the droplets spatter like a constellation. Camera flashes pop, little artificial suns in a midnight universe. A rookie tries to square his shoulders and swallow the metallic taste, but the rookies always taste the penny in the air. A detective with 20 years and a marriage in the rearview kneels and studies a dark crescent printed near the door hinge. Partial shoe? No. It's the half moon of a thumb pressed hard into wet wood. Get me a lift, he says, and the tech nods, slides a kit out of its shell like a magician doing a trick he hates. Dust rises, gray as storm water. Her name is Elena Ward, 26, paralegal. Last seen leaving a bar in the Leather District where the light hits every face like a cross-exam and the bartender remembers everything except what matters. She laughed, he says. She left. She never arrived at the South End walk-up where a two-syllable roommate sleeps through 3 calls in a city's heartbeat. In Elena's purse, recovered beside the earring, a train stub, a matchbook, and a folded clipping she carried like a dare. Mystery in Charlestown, 1993. A photo of a doorway, a shadow, and a dress. Above it, a headline scrawled in her own ink, Find Rowan, cold case, a question carried for years in a coat pocket, warmed and wrinkled and still sharp enough to cut. Rowan. The word floats and sinks in the squad room. Detectives scrape their chairs closer and let the map gather new pins. A whiteboard blooms names like frost. Bartenders, cabbies, night shift dock hands who swear the channel talks when the moon's right. The whispers begin in the usual places. The anonymous tip line, the neighbor who watches everything, the ex-boyfriend who learns what it's like to have a flashlight in his eyes at dawn. I didn't do anything, he says so many times it means nothing. The roommate's face is gray, grief and fluorescent lights varnishing her silence. She saw the clipping once. She'd circle things in red pen, the roommate says. Cases, stories. She said someone was missing and the city had stopped looking. The roommate looks up. She said if no one turned around, the ghost would just keep walking. Evidence sits on a steel table with the posture of a priest. Solemn, patient, cold. The thumbprint is finicky, partial, a crescent the lab can't marry to anyone in the system without an argument and a better copy. The earring yields a whisper of skin, but DNA in 2001 is a long road with potholes and curfews. A single fiber clings to the purse strap, dark, synthetic, common. The door bears a scuff at thigh height like a struggle translated into punctuation. And there's the word Elena breathed into the night air like a password, Rowan. They find a Rowan Kelly in Brighton, a Rowan DeLuca in Revere, a Rowan with a warrant who turns out to be a dead end with a harmonica. They find nothing that grips. Weeks widen. The channel crusts with January ice, then exhales into March. Elena's hospital bed empties into a funeral no one is ready for. Her parents don't sit so much as fold. The church holds the city like a bowl. Reporters tick their pens. An anchor rehearses. Mystery deepens. Unsolved. Outrage. The detective with the marriage in the rear view lights another cigarette he promised he wouldn't and watches the smoke make shapes that look like faces he can't name. Every door he knocks opens on a story that runs out of breath. Every night he types Elena Ward and Rowan into the same blank search box, and the results are a chorus of rumors with no conductor. The clipping from 1993 becomes a second case stapled to the first with the brittle hinge of coincidence. The shadow in the photo leans across 8 years, and you can feel it reaching for now. Then the city moves on, as cities must. New fires, new sirens. The cold case shelf takes the Elena Ward folder and slides it in among the others. The spine's a tidy cemetery, but under the dust, the evidence sits and waits like something wanting to wake up. Headlines ripple back in sporadic gusts, 10-year retrospectives, talk radio callers with theories that tangle themselves like fishing line. The channel killer, someone says, sniffing the air for blood. The term sticks like gum under a bench. Detectives rotate, budgets shrink and swell like the tide. A box is moved, is mislabeled, is found again in a room that hums like a freezer. The partial print becomes a grayscale smudge in a binder that interns carry like dinner platters. The earring, tagged and bagged, climbs from one shelf to another, and somewhere a light bulb blinks its last. But memory is not a straight line. It's a circle that knows how to return. Summer 2023, a new lab director takes a tour of the old evidence with the hungry look of someone who believes the past is still malleable. The city has been learning new tricks. Touch DNA where there was none. Algorithms that read smudges like a second language. Genealogy trees that grow leaves overnight in counties no one's ever visited. Let's run it all, she says, tapping the bag that holds Elena's earring like a doctor tapping a knee. And let's talk to the channel. They do. And a thing that slept wakes up. First, the earring. Under a lens that sees what it wants, the faintest smear of biological trace becomes a sequence, then a code, then a branch on a sprawling, half-public family forest. A surname shoots to the surface that no one has linked to Elena before. It's not Rowan. But Rowan, now a riddle, now a magnet, slides into relevance anyway because that surname shares a cul-de-sac with a family that lived 3 doors down from a Rowan in 1993. Cold case meets cold case. The whiteboard doesn't explode, it coalesces. The new detective, steady posture, patient eyes, calls it a coincidence until it can be something else. Second, the thumbprint. The lab feeds it into the improved reader, and for a long minute the machine frowns. Then a fractional match pings from a database it couldn't speak to in 2001. Not a name, a direction, a partial that overlaps with another partial from another scene. A broken padlock at a storage unit by the docks, reported in 1999, never solved because a padlock is just a padlock until it isn't. Inside that unit back then, tarps, rope, the smell of oil, and lost time. The report is dusty but legible. A tenant with a month-to-month lease paid in cash. Name scribbled like a dare. R. Kinsley. The manager shrugged. Came late, left early, baseball cap, didn't talk. The file closed itself like a tired eye. The city stirs. The words genealogy, hit, re-examination start the quiet kind of fire that moves through halls before it reaches the street. Keep it tight, the captain says. No leaks. Water finds its level. So do rumors. A blogger posts a grainy photo of the earring from a FOIA drop and calls it the Pearl. A comment thread writes a novel's worth of wrong guesses. The detective with patient eyes deletes his social media again and goes to knock on doors that used to be a different color. On a stoop in Dorchester, a woman remembers Elena's face from the posters. She came by here, the woman says, before it happened, asked about a name. The woman closes her eyes, sifts her memory like flour. Rowan, she points down the block. Not a person, a boat. Used to moor over by the channel. Belonged to a man who fixed engines and minded nobody. A boat named Rowan. Cold case headline, rewritten in chalk. They find it, or what's left. Paperwork, a registration that expired before some of the rookie cops were born, a photograph that sat in a drawer with a rubber band around a pack of lottery tickets that never paid. The boat's owner, registered as Robert Kinsley, sold it off cheap in 2002 and died in 2009 in a town that thinks Boston is a rumor. But paper has a shadow the way the body has a breath. The genealogy hit pulls at the Kinsley family tree and finds a living branch that bends into the present tense, a nephew, a mechanic, a man with a work history that threads in and out of the waterfront, a rental agreement from 2001 that puts him in a second-floor unit overlooking the exact stretch of planks where Elena said her last syllables to the dark. The knock on his door is not dramatic. It is measured. It is the kind that carries the weight of 2 decades. He answers in work boots. He looks like anyone. They always do. The conversation is polite until it's not, a voluntary swab, a signature, a long quiet ride inside a cheek swab tube back to a lab where the past is being taught new tricks, and then the phone call the captain takes, in his office with the blinds at half-mast, the kind where he doesn't sit until the end. We have a match. Pause. We have Elena on him. The press conference looks exactly like every press conference you've ever seen until it doesn't. Microphones, seals, flags, faces run with relief and fury. Boston 2001. Cold case solved, the Chiron screams, and the city finally exhales the breath it's been holding since 3:11 a.m. in a different century. But truth is a hallway with extra doors. The detective with patient eyes stands at the lectern and reads the statement like scripture. An arrest has been made in the 2001 assault and homicide of Elena Ward. Cameras hiss. A mother grips a rosary so hard it leaves a map of pain in her palm. Reporters wade forward with the questions you can't really answer. Why so long? Why him? Why now? And under the noise, something else taps the glass. The old clipping in Elena's purse, the shadowed doorway from 1993, the word she chose as her last message to the living. Rowan. A boat, not a man. A boat that belonged to a man who paid in cash. A boat that tied the channel's night noises together into a knot. The nephew is in cuffs, yes. The city approves, as cities do. Yet in the privacy of the evidence room, the earring still glints under plastic like an eye that doesn't blink, and the partial thumbprint keeps its secrets like a scar that will not name the blade. Solved, the headline shouts. But solved isn't the same as finished. And if you listen carefully, Boston is still awake at 3:11 a.m., listening to the water breathe, counting the years between one scream and the next, waiting to learn what the word Rowan was trying to say. The morning after the press conference breaks like a glass in a sink, a crash, a scatter, and then the clatter that keeps going. The city is caffeinated and convinced. Radios yammer at intersections, headlines march along digital marquees with the drumbeat of justice served, and the talk in barbershops is that the case is finally off the city's chest. But the detectives know better. Victory tastes like copper if you swallow it too fast. They ride the narrow elevator to the interview floor with folders tucked under their arms and faces that don't belong to celebration. They belong to patience, to the slow turn of a key in a locked room. In holding two, the nephew sits with his elbows on the table and his eyes on the scuff in the linoleum that looks like a map of the harbor. He's not shaking. He's not smug. He's the kind of quiet that invites a wrong read, cooperation or calculation. You could pick either and lose. They put a plastic cup in front of him. Water sweats down its sides. A detective slides into the chair opposite with the calm of a man who's built his life on letting silence do the work. "You know why you're here," he says. The nephew nods, still looking at the scuff. "Your DNA," the detective says, and the nephew's gaze lifts a fraction. "It's on an item that belonged to Elena Ward." Another nod, slower. The detective watches the man's hands. The knuckles are chapped, the thumbnails black at the edges, with a mechanic's tattoo. "You work on engines," the detective says. The nephew cracks a smile without humor. "If they've got pistons, I know them." The detective leans in a breath. "Boats too?" Another nod. "Sometimes." The room smells like old coffee and new paper. A clock coughs out a minute in the corner. In a lab where time grows impatient, the earring sits beneath a hood that hums softly like a lullaby. Technicians read its secret again and again, as if repetition can coax certainty. They aren't guessing, they're measuring. The sequence aligns, the software sings its confident little song. The report prints with a font that looks neutral and therefore feels like truth. A match to a close relative of the nephew's own profile, a clean echo. The lab director signs her name with a hand that's steady, not because she has no doubts, but because procedure doesn't care for nerves. Behind her, the whiteboard lists other artifacts from the scene, a scatter of nouns looking for verbs: fiber, thumbprint, scuff, railing, door. Everything sits until someone tells it to stand. The boat named Rowan becomes a lodestar. An old photograph of her, sunburnt wood, a modest name lettered in paint that looks like it learned to spell in a driveway, makes its way into the squad room. The city in the background is a decade younger, cranes holding their breath mid-rise. A detective calls the Marina Archive in a voice that smiles for no one and gets a clerk who still likes paper better than people. "Rowan," she says slowly, chewing the word. "That was Kinsley's old tub, right? Stalled twice on Sundays. He'd curse like the sea was listening." The clerk finds a ledger, a line in smudged ink, birth paid cash, repair work credited, a note, see storage unit file. The loop tightens and a breath goes thin in the room because the padlock in 1999 starts talking to the earring in 2001, and both keep pointing at the name on the lease. R. Kinsley, uncle to the man in Holding 2 who drinks water like it's his last obligation. Memory is a room with different light depending on who walks in. In Southie, an old-timer on a bench pulls down the brim of his cap, looks at the photo of Rowan, and says he saw her throw a tantrum one night, engine coughing, smoke biting the throat of the wind. Late, real late, he says, and the detective asks for a date he can't have. "Was when the Sox dropped 2 in a row to the Yanks," the man offers, history and sports braided the way this city likes. The detective scrawls it down anyway. A month, a season, a feeling. Down by Fort Point, a woman who walks her dog at hours that belong to nobody remembers a shadow untying a line like it owed him money. "He never looked around," she says. "Just did what he was doing, like the night already knew him." They roll the nephew's history out on the table like a city map with stains on the corners. Employment checks out because he likes engines more than lies. The apartment in 2001 overlooks the water, but not glamorously. No postcard view, just the kind of angle where the night collects. His references talk about a man who shows up early and leaves late, who knows the weight of a torque wrench in the dark. There's a girlfriend from the middle of the timeline who doesn't return calls until she does, and when she sits in an interview room that smells like grief warmed over, she offers a string of details that feel too small until you pull them and the room rearranges. "He hates loose ends," she says. "He'd stay up over a carburetor like it was a crossword that insulted him. And he had this thing about the channel, said it sounded different at 3 a.m, said you could hear other cities in it." She looks down, said you could hear names. Elena's parents come to see the detectives with the practiced courage of people who've been saying their daughter's name into microphones longer than anyone should. They sit in chairs that have held every kind of sorrow and hear the update that half the city has already swallowed through a screen. They nod at the right times, ask the necessary question at the end. Is it over? There's a way to answer that, and it's not the truth. The detective with patient eyes tries to be gentle with the word no. "We've made an arrest," he says. "We have strong evidence." He doesn't say that the clipping in Elena's purse hums like a live wire on his desk. He doesn't say that solved and finished are enemies at certain hours. He looks at the father who has replaced God with procedure and the mother whose hands have learned the routine of waking from the same nightmare. "We are not stopping," he says instead, a promise modest enough to be kept. Across the river, inside a newsroom that was once a cathedral for ink and is now a set for screens, a reporter who still carries a notebook at all times starts to feel the itch behind the headline. She doesn't distrust the arrest. She distrusts the shape of stories when they arrive too perfectly. She pulls the old 1993 piece that Elena carried and reads it like scripture in reverse. Mystery in Charlestown. A shadow in a doorway, a name not given, a police line erected and then dismantled with no one walking through it. She calls the byline at the bottom of the clipping, hears a voicemail message from a man who left journalism for a job that lets him sleep, and then finds him anyway because sources are just people with habits. Over coffee that tastes like the past, he tells her there was a whisper about a boat back then too. Not a suspect, he says. A place, a hinge, something that carried the night across the river. He rubs at a knuckle like it contains a thought. "I wrote too clean," he says, and the reporter writes that down. Clean is the enemy of true when the city is awake. The interrogation moves like a chess game between strangers, opening gambits, feints, a rook lifted and put back down just to feel its weight. "We have the earring," the detective says. "Your DNA." The nephew's jaw flexes once, then goes still. Touched a lot of stuff, he says. I work docks. The detective nods like that's a reasonable song. Sure, he says. But Elena never hired you to fix an engine. The nephew looks at the scuff again as if the floor could offer an alibi. You like the channel at night? The detective asks, and the nephew's eyes lift entirely for the first time. I like engines, he says. The detective lets a beat pass. You know the boat named Rowan? The nephew blinks, a human shudder. Uncle's boat, he says finally, and there's either warmth in the word or frost. The detective can't tell which. You take her out? The nephew shakes his head, once, a denial stripped of drama. She coughed, he says. He hated it when I touched her. The detective writes that down with a hand that thinks about metaphor at peculiar moments. If you stand on the Congress Street Bridge at 3:11 a.m., the water doesn't give you answers. It gives you the gift of hearing your own questions. Detectives have started doing this, not because it's in any manual, but because rituals grow around the unsolved like frost along a window's edge. They count the pylons. They watch the reflections of the warehouses fathom and unfathom themselves. They say Elena's name once, like a password. They imagine a second set of footsteps on the boards, the angle of a shadow against the door, where the half-moon thumbprint said somebody leaned in hard. If they're young, they think about running toward the sound. If they're older, they think about how quickly a night can convince you it belongs to someone else. The lab, meanwhile, is trying to teach the partial thumbprint new manners. Algorithms like hungry dogs tug at the edges of the crescent, fill the gaps with probabilities that used to be fantasies, and compare the result not just to names but to moments, touches that lingered where you wouldn't expect. Places a man didn't belong, a padlock that yielded to someone's impatience and left behind a curved signature the size of a thumbnail. The machine coughs up a likelihood. The examiner hesitates like a priest reconsidering a sermon. The partial from 1999 and the partial from 2001 share an attitude, if not a certainty. The report uses cautious language, the way official documents wrap nervousness in Latin, and the detective underlines the most human sentence in it. These impressions may have been made by the same finger. May is a tricky word. May keeps detectives awake. Back at the Marina archives, the clerk finds another ledger, thinner, meaner, a record of repair chits scribbled on carbon paper that turns fingertips blue. Twice in late 2000, someone buys points and condenser for an outboard that sounds like it's giving up the ghost. The buyer signs as R. Kinsley, and a second signature in a different hand initials the pickup. The letters are careful, as if written by someone who hates writing their name. The initials line up with the nephew's. The detective's eyes narrow to a coin slot. He takes a breath through his teeth, a sound that means the past is starting to cohere. The reporter with his notebook walks the route Elena would have taken that night, the leather of the city still carrying the creases of 2001. She counts streetlights, listens for echoes. On a brick wall, someone has chalked a message to no one in particular, a grief that refuses grammar. She stops at the bar in the leather district where the light testifies, and the bartender, who remembers everything except what matters, pours water and gives her the inventory of that night again. She laughed, he says. She left. The reporter looks at the stool where Elena sat, an ordinary piece of furniture made sacred by hindsight, and she realizes that the phrase solved will never be big enough to hold the particulars of a human life. She writes anyway, because writing is the way she refuses to look away. In Holding Two, the nephew asks for a cigarette he won't get and scratches at a memory he might have. You keep saying her name like I knew her, he mutters, and the detective keeps his tone level in the way surgeons keep their hands clean. You touched her earring, he says. Why? The nephew exhales with his eyes, a small collapse. You ever shake a hand that wasn't yours? He says, strange poetry in a room that doesn't traffic in it. Sometimes stuff gets on you. The detective wants to slam a palm on the table and blow the niceties off the case, but rage is a bad tool. It breaks what you need. He slides a photo across instead. Elena's earring under light, a small universe caught mid-glint. That got on you, he says. Explain the weather. In a different building, a team dredges forms from boxes like fishermen lifting nets. They look for every complaint filed along the channel between 1998 and 2002, anything that smells like a rehearsal. A woman followed, a scuffle ignored, a voice on the wind that didn't belong to the wind. 3 nights stand up and wave. March 99, a dockhand reports hearing a splash and a muffled argument near the old piers. July 20, a jogger says a man stepped from behind a piling and then stepped back when a second runner appeared. November 001, 2 nights after Elena, a witness reports the sound of a boat engine starting and stopping in little angry fits at 3:07 a.m. The threads don't tie themselves, but in the hands of someone who has tied too many, they begin to oblige. The detective with the marriage in the rear view watches the younger detective and the nephew in the room and feels the odd shiver of déjà vu you get when a case sneaks up on a second life. He thinks of the first nights, of cocktails of adrenaline and grief, of rooms like this one that seem to bend time into a pretzel. He thinks of the word Rowan on a woman's lips, as if it was a prayer or a password or the throat's last wish. He nurses the theory that Elena had solved more than anyone knew before someone took her solution away. He does not say it. He files it under belief, one tab over from proof. Night lowers its shoulder and leans against the city again. On the bridge, a wind that has been doing this longer than you have moves the surface of the water into patterns that don't repeat. In 1,000 windows, the news replay blares the same clip. The captain at the lectern, the word solved wearing its bright suit, the nephew walking with his arms bridged by officers who look like doorways. The comments section writes its liturgy: relief, rage, conspiracy, comfort. In a house where a family eats dinner later than it used to, the name Elena floats out of a television and into a room that saves a seat for her at every holiday table. Someone lifts a glass and sets it down without drinking. In the squad room, the board changes by an inch, which is what real progress always looks like. Another string taut, another pin corrected, a new line drawn lightly between two names that used to live on different walls. The earrings photograph shifts an inch left to make space for a new image. The carburetor from Rowan, photographed in evidence light, its throat black with time. The detective with patient eyes reaches for the marker, writes a single word above it, a question dressed up as a label: why? And the city goes to bed the way it always does, one light at a time, badly and imperfectly and full of dreams that wake it into a sweat. The channel keeps the night's confidences. The lab keeps working after the last human leaves. The nephew stares at a ceiling that does not return the gaze. Elena's clipping breathes a thin paper breath under plastic, and the picture of a doorway 3 decades dead holds steady like a door that knows it will open because it has before. Solved, the headline insists. The body of the story keeps walking. By afternoon, the sky is the color of filing cabinets and the air tastes like paperwork. The city hums in its usual keys, but inside the evidence unit there's a new pitch in the choir, a thin, persistent note that says keep going. A warrant cracks open the 1999 storage unit in the present tense, the one with the padlock that remembered the curve of a thumb. The unit is no longer leasable. It's a concrete throat with a tin door that coughs when you roll it up. Dust lifts like a congregation. The inventory reads like a thrift store of the unspecific. 3 tarps, a milk crate of rusted sockets, a dock cleat pried loose sometime when nobody was watching, a bucket with rope coiled in an obedience that looks rehearsed. None of it screams, all of it mutters. The tech photographs each thing from angles that would embarrass a portrait photographer. The detective with patient eyes stands just inside the door and listens for the one detail that wants to be louder. It's the bucket, finally. When they lift the rope, the bottom gives up a clutter of little metal teeth, a graveyard of spent ignition keys. Not automotive, not household, outboard. Some filed to strange profiles, some snapped at the shoulders, some tagged with masking tape labels that have lost their courage. 2 tags still read in a jittery hand. RWN1, RWN2. The detective does not smile. He doesn't need to. The room does it for him, a ripple in the air like recognition. The keys slide into separate bags, as if into pews. Somewhere, a ledger in the marina office that still smells like coffee and copy toner grows a partner in crime. Across town, the reporter with the notebook leans on a different kind of archive. Microfiche breathes heat into her face as she scrolls the papers 2000s away, obits and sports box scores and ads for apartments that look cheap and weren't. She hunts for a pattern that will behave itself. Complaints near the channel at the edges of days. Unnamed men who stepped out of alleys and back into anonymity. A string of notices about break-ins at storage facilities where nothing was stolen except time. She finds a short item from December 00 that didn't earn above the fold, a blot of text that might as well be a shrug. Vandalism at Harbor View Marina. Unknown subject accessed maintenance shed. No suspects. She circles it anyway. When the past talks, it rarely uses a microphone. At HQ, the nephew's attorney arrives with a briefcase that looks like it likes to win. He folds his client into a bubble of privilege and tells the detectives that questions will be answered later, somewhere with better chairs. The nephew sits quieter inside the noise, a man in a small boat in heavy weather. The detective with the marriage in the rear view watches through the glass and feels that old itch at the back of his mind, the one that says a narrative is trying to write itself without permission. When the door opens and the attorney shepherds his client away for the day, the detective doesn't argue. Process is religion here, and you don't blaspheme if you want your prayers answered. The lab keeps its own calendar. Under a microscope that has seen 1,000 tiny wars, one of the ignition keys from the bucket shows a kiss of skin oil where there should be none after years of neglect. A miracle? Not quite. The key had been bagged badly in 1999, then opened and rebagged in 2005 for a routine audit, human fingers leaving the gods their offerings. But on the shaft there's also a smudge of something else, a varnish of fuel and salt that has trapped a sliver of fiber the color of midnight. Synthetic again. Common, yes, but not generic. The instrument breathes and tells the examiner what it thinks. Nylon from a jacket that was popular among dock workers in the late 90s because it was cheap, warm, and indifferent to weather. The brand lived in discount bins and union halls. The examiner writes the word probable and underlines it twice. They backtrack the nephew's wardrobe like the city's most obsessive personal shopper. Old pay stubs place him at a shop that offered employee discounts on workwear. A photograph at a barbecue in '01 shows him with a beer and a jacket that has the right sheen, the right indifference. At a cookout in a backyard that has since been decked over, a cousin remembers the jacket's zipper catching like a lie. He'd swear at it like it insulted him, the cousin says. Said the cold cared about that kind of thing. A small memory, but sometimes the smallest stones start the loudest avalanches. It's Elena who keeps pulling the story forward by the hem. Her clipping from 1993 yields one more splinter when the reporter scans it with a tired machine that still believes in toner. A desk number from the old city desk, penned in the margin, not Elena's handwriting. The reporter calls it, expecting a deadline and getting a beep and a voicemail that belongs to a storage warehouse now. She visits anyway because the day is long and the stubbornness is longer. In a staff room that has lived several lives, a manager unlocks a closet no one's opened since a renovation. Inside, a box of chaotic ghosts, microcassettes, the kind that reporters loved when the city still smelled like ink. One is labeled Charlestown Doorway, 93. The reporter feels the old desire to bow and doesn't. She borrows the recorder on a smile and a promise she intends to keep. The tape's sound is a sea of hiss and patience. Voices emerge like figures on a foggy key. A man speaks low and close to the mic. An anonymous source trapped in 60 minutes of cheap plastic. He tied there, the voice says. Not always. Enough. The reporter's pen stills. The voice names a berth that later belongs to Rowan. Names a habit. Late night arrivals, the engine complaining, a figure with a hat that ate his face. He kept to shadows, the voice says, but he had a way he'd lean when he lied. A shoulder of it. Photographs cannot hold that. Tape can. The voice never says a name. It says a posture. It names a habit, like a fingerprint. The detectives feed the tape to their second ears. A transcription appears. Words with their breath removed. The anonymous source's description of the lean, the hat, the boat's cough. A long-ago rumor that a young woman asked questions around the docks in 2001. Head full of clippings, eyes like she already knew, mouth full of a name that wasn't a person. Elena on a scavenger hunt that led her through an older case and into her own. The room goes quiet after the last word. The detective with patient eyes presses his thumb against the table edge and leaves no mark. They go looking for the hat, not literally. For the way a man makes himself smaller when the night wants him big. Surveillance from 2001 is a stingy god, but somebody with a camcorder liked filming sunsets from the bridge, then turning to catch the city's lights learning their lines. In the background of a grainy frame, a figure at the edge of the planks, weight canted to the right, a shoulder tilted like it's carrying a story he won't put down. A boat just outside the center of the frame coughs twice in mechanical complaint. It slides into night. No face, a posture. The detective freezes the frame and lives with it for a while. He calls the nephew in his mind and holds the posture up like a mirror. Back to the storage unit. A hidden shelf lip yields a small metal tin that refuses to open until it does. Inside, not money, not rings, not the trophies that television loves. A roll of tape, electrical, old, stuck to itself like a secret. And 2 fasteners whose arch looks like they'd bite a rope and not let go. The fasteners have a manufacturer's stamp, a model number. The kind of breadcrumb that wants to be followed by anyone who likes catalogs. A call to a supplier whose ledgers outlive their owner's nets. A list of sales to the marina in late 2000. The purchase order initials? RK. The pickup initials? The nephew's again. The loop tightens until it hums. The attorney files motions with the speed of someone who hears the hum, too. The nephew surrenders and posts bond in an amount that makes strangers angry and friends quiet. Cameras get their footage, a face in a doorway, a step into air, the click of a door that doesn't care who passes it. The reporter's story drops online at 5:12 p.m., a blueprint of everything and nothing. The boat, the storage unit, the tape that caught a posture. She avoids the word solved like a superstition. Her editor changes the headline to include it anyway because headlines are salesmen by trade. She receives a message from a private address an hour later. You're missing what the water knows. She meets the source where fools meet and sometimes saints, a diner near the water that serves coffee like penance. He is a retired patrol officer with the eyes of someone who has learned to ignore his own reflection. He worked the channel beat back when the city still pretended it could be quiet. I saw him twice, he says without preamble. Didn't know it was him. Just knew the night made room. He describes the lean. He describes a boat that was embarrassed to be loud. He remembers a woman's voice cutting the wind once, a hey that wasn't afraid yet. He pulled up in the cruiser and the figures dissolved like sugar. You remember the time, he says, because the clock in the car stuck at 3:11 all week, some fuse. We laughed at it. The reporter writes the number carefully like it's a prayer bead. It belongs to the case now in a way that feels ordained. In the squad room, the detectives work the nephew's timeline with a comb that has no teeth left. The night of Elena's attack, his alibi says he was home. The landlord remembers noise. Can't be sure if it was television or the channel being the channel. A downstairs neighbor remembers a footfall, maybe two, heading out at a time when only the tide moves. Cell records in 2001 are a blunt instrument, but they triangulate boredom. His phone slept in a rectangle that includes his building and the first 4 minutes of a walk to the water. Payphone logs from a corner no longer occupied by anything useful show a 3:02 a.m. call to the marina's after-hours line, the kind that pages a sleepy guard. The voice on the message did not leave a name. It left the sound of an engine in the background trying to decide if it could be alive again. The timestamp sits under a magnifying glass. The detectives lean close enough to fog it. The lab hands back the thumbprint report's careful line a shade bolder. May still lives there, but it's learned to carry more weight. Across two scenes, 2 years apart, the same finger likely pressed hard in moments that mattered. You can almost see the hand behind it, the anger or the urgency or the ritual of control. Procedure keeps its vocabulary cautious. The detectives do not. They begin to talk about the uncle as a teacher and the nephew as a good student, about the boat as classroom and the channel as a kind of church where mistakes were forgiven by tide. This is theory. Theory is not proof. But theory is the map you carry when GPS is dead. Elena's parents come back because they can't not. They bring a box this time. Inside, her notebooks, the ones she scribbled in when the city didn't understand her scholarship of its shadows. The detectives lift pages like feathers. Lists of names that lead nowhere. Arrows pointing from Charlestown doorway to Rowan to storage to call reporter to check after hours line. She was building their board before they had one. A sketch of the channel at night lives in margins. A child's drawing except that the child was very serious and the water looks like it's listening. At the corner of one page, Elena has written in block letters, "If he taught someone, he left twice." The detective with patient eyes sits back as if punched. He rereads it. He feels the room tilt. They return to the storage unit again because Elena's handwriting has a way of turning keys. This time they search the ceiling, not the floor. A panel yields to a curious knuckle and a crawl space releases the most unromantic treasure, boxes of receipts, the kind men keep when they distrust banks or wives or memory. A wad stapled together and labeled boat. Winter shows purchases in the weeks around Elena's death, bleach, rags, a new length of line, 2 cheap clip-on lights, a pack of industrial wipes, legitimate on their face, ominous in chorus. One receipt bears the nephew's card number in the old imprint relief like a fossil. His attorney will say errands. The water will say something else. Night stands up outside. The detectives drift to the bridge, as if pulled by a magnet in the boards. The water throws their reflections back like a promise it has no intention of keeping. The younger of them points to the black seam where current changes its mind. "There," he says. "If I wanted to lose a thing, I'd ask that seam to eat it." The older detective nods. He thinks of a ring that never surfaced in a different case, of a tool that was never found, of a pair of gloves that the tide took and made into a shrug. "The channel remembers," he says, and it sounds like a superstition until the wind repeats it. In the hours before morning claims ownership, the reporter files a second piece and then a third, slaloming between what she can say and what she can leave in the dark without lying. She ends the last one with a line that makes her editor sigh and let it live. "Solved is a word for the living. The water wants another. She closes her laptop and listens to the echo of the tape's anonymous voice, a posture, a shoulder that leaned when it lied. She dreams of a boat that coughs and a clock that refuses to learn any other time. Back in evidence, under a softer lamp, Elena's earring sits inside plastic like a star preserved in a jar. The nephew's DNA is on it. That is not a metaphor. That is a fact. Around it, a universe swirls, tape, keys, fibers, ledgers, tapes, habits, the hush of the channel like a long inhale. The board in the squad room tightens again by an inch. A new line from the payphone to the after hours page, a line from the storage tin to the marina receipts, a dotted line from posture to photograph to tape to memory. The word solve still shines on televisions across Boston like neon through rain. In this room, another word glows dimmer and truer, almost. And when the clock peels itself to 3:11 a.m., because it always does whether anyone is watching or not, a gull rides the wind like it owns it, a buoy clanks its one-note hymn, and the channel keeps its secret another night, patient as a teacher waiting for a slow student to finally say the answer out loud. Dawn bends over the harbor like a detective reading a confession. The city yawns, pretends it slept, and the channel doesn't bother pretending at all. In the squad room, the coffee is new, the resolve older than anyone in it. The board has grown a spine overnight, strings taut, photos squared, the kind of geometry that makes a room feel like it's leaning toward an answer. A knock at the door brings in a courier with a box that should have arrived 20 years ago. Records from a boatyard north of the city that closed when rents rose and romance died. The label is a bruise of ink. Kinsley. Winterizing. Inside, a paper skeleton, carb float orders, gasket kits, spark plugs, and a folded diagram with grease fingerprints at the corners. On the margin, in a hand that wants to be smaller than it is, a note. Choke sticks, when cold, tap to seat, tap to seat. It reads like instruction and threat. They slide the diagram into evidence sleeves, and someone says the word Rowan out loud, like a dare. No one shushes it. Names have been louder in this room. The nephew wakes in a bed that is not a cell because the system believes in daylight and due process. He looks at a ceiling that refuses to offer shelter and hears the channel in the gap between sirens and silence. On his kitchen counter, unopened mail rehearses denial. In the sink, a glass leans like a tired witness. He turns on the tap for water he won't drink. Across town, the uncle is a grave that yields nothing but the outline of a man who taught a boat to keep secrets. Graves are good at that. The detectives draft a list of the uncle's friends and find that men who love boats love other men who love boats, and they speak in manual, not memoir. He was careful, one says, hated mess. Another, he didn't bring people around. A third, he didn't like the channel after midnight, said it wasn't the same water. Lies have a way of protecting their own. The reporter with the notebook interviews the water's memory in the only way possible. She interviews the people who have stood nearest to it longest. A bait shop owner whose face is a chart of storms remembers a kid, late teens then, shadowing Kinsley with a tool roll and a hunger to be told what the world is made of. Quiet, the shop owner says, too careful for that age, carried himself like he'd already made a mistake and was trying to keep the next one smaller. She shows him a photo of the nephew 10 years later. He nods once. That's him with the years on. At the lab, a tech puts the carburetor from Rowan under a scope and finds, under the tar of time, a shine in the throat where something abrasive kissed metal, consistent with a wire brush, consistent with someone who wanted to hurry a cleaning because a clock in the head was too loud. On a screw head, a crescent of tool slip records a hand that worked right to left with too much impatience, left-handed likely. The nephew signs intake forms with his left hand. The examiner writes likely with the caution of someone who has had to testify about words softer than facts. Likely is still a weight when you stack enough of them. The tape from '93 spins again for anyone who needs to become a believer a second time. The voice mentions a thing the detectives missed the first listen. The boat's name repainted in a darker shade. Letters wobbled where an old name was sanded thin, but not gone. Someone armed with patience and solvent might coax the old name up like a ghost under the skin. Someone armed with a camera might show a jury that boats forget poorly. They trace the chain of sail. Rowan sold in '02 to a man who sailed her badly until she sank in a minor sulk near a sandbar and was salvaged for parts. Those parts went 3 places: a scrapyard, a collector's garage, and a teaching program that puts kids and wooden hulls together until both stand up straighter. The program still has her starboard gunwale drilled for a name board long gone, the pieces pocked and stubborn. Under a low rake of light, letters emerge like bruises, not ROWAN before that. 4 letters, then a gap where a screw once lived, then 2 more. The shop teacher frowns like the wood owes him money. A conservator with hands like prayers applies tissue and solvent with monkish patience, and faint strokes admit themselves to the present. Radon. Radon? The detectives look at each other. A toxic joke for a boat name or a code. A search through old registrations shows a Kinsley boat named Radon registered in '96, transferred to a second owner on paper only, then to Kinsley again as Rowan in '99. It's the same hull. A new paint job. A rinse of identity. Cold case headline. Name change hides history. The reporter writes it before she forgives herself for liking the rhythm. In Holding Two later, because he comes back because he has to, the nephew sits with his attorney on either side like bookends and lets the questions bounce off the cover. The detective with patient eyes asks about the left-handed tool work without saying left-handed. The nephew's mouth twitches at a corner. He says, engines teach you their directions. You don't teach them yours. He says he learned on his uncle's boat, the one that coughed like it wanted an apology. Rowan, the detective says, and the nephew regards the word without flinching. Radon, the detective adds, and the nephew's eyes do a small, involuntary arithmetic of surprise. Not much. Enough. Names, he says, are for the DMV. Engines don't care. Elena returns to the room in the only way the dead do, through pages. Her notebooks yield a bus schedule highlighted to within an inch of usefulness. Mapping rides to the marina, the boatyard, the storage lot. She underlines a detail that might have been nothing or everything. The after-hours guard at Harborview rotated on Wednesdays, and the one with the loose mouth called everyone Captain. Her margin note, call Wednesday. That week, in January 2001, Wednesday was the day before. The detective reads the line and feels the unsaid thicken. She was a day from a conversation that might have bought her an inch. A day from safety is still a mile. The guard is retired now and wears his years without apology. His memory is a drawer that sticks and then glides. He remembers a man who liked rules until they were in his way, who always had the right receipt and the wrong smile, who kept his cap pulled low and his words shorter than they needed to be. He'd say evening like it was a warning, the guard says. And he had a kid sometimes. The kid didn't talk. Looked like he was listening to something no one else could hear. The guard remembers one night a woman came to the office door too late for courtesy, eyes lit with the kind of purpose that makes men nervous. She asked for Rowan, he says. I said boats don't answer. She laughed like that was almost fair. And the storage unit gives one more thing because objects like to earn their keep when people won't. A length of line tucked behind a joist, braided cut, then rejoined with a fisherman's bend that is neat to the point of pride. The knot carries a signature like a hand does. They photograph it. They show the picture to 3 old men who tie knots in their sleep, and each says the same sentence the same way. He learned that from someone who cares too much. The nephew, in old photos from fishing trips, shows the tail ends of knots that look exactly like this one. The uncle, in a photo from '95, is teaching a boy to tie it, the boy's tongue clenched between his teeth with effort. You can inherit anything if you watch hard enough. The genealogical tree that brought them to the nephew throws a side branch into view. A cousin who left Boston in '02 and never looked back, who worked summers on boats and winters loading warehouses, who got married in a small ceremony that smells, on paper, like wanting to start new. They sit across from him in a diner that doesn't pretend its coffee is anything but survival. He says he doesn't talk to the nephew much. He says boats are trouble if you let them be. He says his uncle was a man who knew the difference between cleaning and erasing. Then he breaks his eggs and the yolk runs like a line across a map. He wipes it up with bread and changes the subject to weather. Not every door opens when you knock. The reporter receives an envelope with no return address because the city likes its drama analog sometimes. Inside, a photocopy of a page from a maritime catalog, the exact model of the rope fastener found in the storage tin, circled with handwritten numbers beside it, quantities that match the receipts in the ceiling cache. Tucked behind it, a torn scrap of a ledger with 2 initials in block letters that don't match the uncle's hand, but might match the nephew's careful, school-taught strokes. If he picked up parts, he'll say he did errands. If he replaced hardware, he'll say maintenance. If maintenance and midnight met, the channel will nod and keep its counsel. At 3:11 a.m., because the time has become a ritual even in daylight memory, a patrol car pauses on the bridge and kills its engine. 2 officers listen to the water breathe and count their lives in the sound. One says, "You believe in hauntings?" The other says, "I believe in tides." They watch a shape move under the surface that is not a fish, not a log, not anything they can name. It is gone before it is fully recognized. Some nights the city videotapes itself in your head whether you want it to or not. They go back to the after-hours phone logs because Elena's margin notes keep flicking the light. The 3:02 a.m. call, 2 nights after her death, feels like a scene change no one wrote. They pull the audio, long buried on a DAT tape filed behind a misprint of a Christmas party flyer. The voice is low, grainy through payphone throat, and it says a single sentence twice. Gates locked, then again, gates locked. In the background, the boat coughs in small, apologetic fits. The guard on duty wrote in the log, false alarm. That night, the page didn't wake him. The next morning, the lock was fine. The detectives play the audio 3 times, and on the 4th, they hear a clink, a fastener falling perhaps, or a clip kissing metal before it finds its seat. The sound is nothing to anyone who hasn't spent months learning this case's vocabulary. To them, it is a pronoun. It points to someone. The nephew's attorney files a motion to exclude the genealogy path from any future trial as fruit from a tree the Constitution doesn't like. Judges will argue. Jurors will be told to forget what they never heard. The detectives keep their focus on the things that do not require anyone's permission: metal, rope, wood, time. The lab prints a report that uses the word consistent 5 times about 5 separate elements. Consistent with this brand of jacket. Consistent with the tool slip of a left-handed mechanic. Consistent with a knot taught by a particular generation of dockmen. Consistent with line purchased in late 2000. Consistent with an engine cleaned in a hurry after a night that didn't end the way anyone planned. Consistent is not the same as proved. In the accumulation, though, it starts to behave itself like gravity. Elena's parents come once more, softer at the edges, sharper at the center. They deliver a single object that had been in a box labeled MISC, the matchbook from Elena's purse, the one with a bar's logo and a phone number she never called. On the inside cover, she had written 2 words: Call Wednesday. Underneath, a shape not quite a word, the start of one maybe, Ra. The mother touches the plastic sleeve with a finger that has made too many dinners for a chair that stayed empty. She was so close, she says, and the room agrees without speaking. The reporter finishes a draft she will not publish yet about the way cities teach women to carry keys between their fingers like wishes, about how headlines tidy what grief refuses to straighten. She writes a line she will cut because it feels like a secret, that Elena, in chasing one old shadow, stepped into a newer one that was learning how to be itself. She deletes it. She sits a while without typing and hears the tape from '93 hiss at the edge of hearing like a tide. By late evening, the squad room feels like the inside of a watch. Every second is a gear tooth that must find its mate. The detective with patient eyes stands at the board and redraws the channel with a marker. The docks, the bridge, the seam where current makes its private treaty, the payphone, the after-hours office, the line from the nephew's building like a thread, a spider spun under duress. He writes 3 words where they converge. She found him. It is not an accusation. It is a geometry. Night comes with the indifference of weather. In the marina that still remembers, a buoy knocks its skull against the world and learns nothing new. A gull lands on a piling and arranges its ragged wings like a man adjusting a coat he can't afford to replace. Somewhere, a door that was once a photograph in a clipping opens to admit only air. In a drawer, the earring glints. In a bag, the keys lie without their teeth. In a ceiling, the receipts rustle when the HVAC kicks on. In a heart, a mother says her daughter's name like a spell that didn't work but should have. Solved, the city keeps saying to itself, because the word tucks you in. In this room, the word that keeps them awake is closer to said than to shown. They are building the bridge between the two with rope and knots and the old grammar of engines. And as the clock slides into its favorite minute, 3:11, without needing help, the channel breathes again, and if you're the sort of person who listens, you can hear a boat that isn't there cough once in memory, then twice, then fall quiet like a story waiting for the next line. Evening falls like a curtain someone forgot to pull all the way, and the squad room breathes in unison with the HVAC. The marker-sketched channel on the whiteboard looks like an artery now, a line where the city's pulse is audible if you put your ear to it. She found him, the detective wrote, and the words sit there with the gravity of a compact truth. Geometry breeds logistics. They draft a search that requires watermen, not just officers, a grid over the seam where current changes its mind, a pattern you fly with a boat's nose and patience. The harbor unit brings sonar that was young when the case was, now upgraded into a thing that reads the bottom like Braille. There's a diver who prefers silence to briefing and checks his gear like Catholics check guilt. He was a rookie in '01. Watched Elena's posters go soft on poles, swore at the tide under his breath. He doesn't say that out loud. He flips his mask down and lets the water take him. Sonar returns the seafloor in grayscale confession. Discarded cycles of metal, a shopping cart cathedral, a pipe sulking in silt, stones pretending to be other stones. And then, just shy of the line, the detective drew between payphone and gate, a geometry that isn't geology, rectilinear, small, not natural. They mark it with a buoy that nods in a wind that isn't there. The diver swims the line, steam ghosting off his exhale, fingers skimming a carpet of cold. He touches the object and feels the stubbornness of something that has decided to belong to the bottom. He rocks it side to side like a tooth you're not ready to pull. It lifts a quarter inch and lets go of a thread of silt that curls like cigarette smoke. He signals. Surface. A hook descends on a rope that remembers a fisherman's bend. Metal kisses metal. The clip bites. The winch hums. A small heavy thing rises, trailing the night with it. On deck, the techs cluster in the light like moths with lab coats. It's a toolbox, the cheap kind you buy angry because you need the thing right now. Plastic fatigued to chalk. Latches seized. A screwdriver pries and complains. The lid gives up with a sound like old tape leaving glass. Inside, a congregation of banalities made holy by context. Wire brush, electrical tape fused to itself, a cheap clip-on work light with jaws that left identical crescents on the gunnel plank in the teaching program's shop. A plastic sleeve with a folded diagram, the same carb schematic the boatyard sent over, grease fingerprints echoing as if the owner had multiple hands. And at the bottom, like a punchline only the water finds funny, a nameboard screw with paint clotted in its threads, 2 colors, then a third. When they pick the paint with scalpel patience, layers reveal themselves like seasons, darker beneath lighter beneath new. Radon under Rowan under touch-up. A boat's palimpsest in micro. The diver leans against the rail and doesn't say I told you so because he didn't. He watches the skyline pretend indifference. On shore, the detective with patient eyes calls the lab, his voice clipped into the vocabulary of chain of custody and wet evidence. The toolbox goes into a bin that will be warmed, dried, documented until the objects inside confess not with words but with consistency. The clip-on light bears a tooth mark, the serrated bite of a specific jaw profile. They measure it. The jaws in the storage tin upstairs, dry under fluorescence, match the bite like twins. The nephew hears about the dive because news travels like electricity in a wet city. He sits with his attorney at a table that is pretending to be neutral. The attorney says the word circumstantial like it's a disinfectant. The nephew asks if tools float. The attorney blinks once, slow. Not well, he says. The nephew rubs his thumb with forefinger as if measuring something that won't show up on a ruler and doesn't know he's doing it. The detective will remember that later. The reporter spends her evening in a room that belongs to the city but smells like old coffee and polite lies. The municipal records office. She's already made friends with the clerk who jokes about loving paper because paper doesn't talk back. Tonight, the clerk gives her a smile, like a pass. There's a box misfiled under utilities, she says. Don't ask me which utility thought they needed Marina Gate override logs, but... She pushes the box across with the ceremony of a coronation. Inside, time stares up with a number stamped on its face. January 2001. The log is analog. Clipboards, carbon duplicates, grease thumbprints in the margins. Midnight to 4 o'clock a.m. The entries are sparse. A salt wind doesn't generate paperwork, but on the night in question, 2 entries in a careful hand. 302, call from payphone. Gates locked. 307, override attempted. No access granted. Notes, line engaged. The reporter underlines 307 with a pen that pretends it isn't shaking. She takes a photo for the wall in her head where unfinished things hang. She calls the byline from 93 again out of superstition and gets, this time, an answer. The ex-reporter's voice has retired twice since the last story he loved. He agrees to meet because nostalgia is its own currency. He brings an envelope with a single index card inside. On it, handwritten in the lefty slant of someone fighting his own hand, Radon, Rowan, RK, Doc Gossip says training someone. The card smells like a drawer that closes and opens rarely. He laughs without humor. I wrote it down because I didn't believe it, he says. The boat switched names twice in 4 years. I figured the paperwork was where the bodies were. Turns out the water was. At the lab, the toolbox gets the same regard as a saint's relics. The wire brush is fat with old sins. They pluck a hair from the bristle, synthetic, common, not helpful, and a flake of paint adhered to a single strand, like a pilgrim. Under the scope, the paint declares its recipe, a manufacturer's chemistry signature that can talk to order history. The miniatures always tell a larger story, a line of purchase orders to a supply house that delivered to the boatyard north of the city, The same house that invoiced Kinsley in '99 for a repaint. Paper and paint agree in secret handshake. The clip-on light bulb has failed and preserved itself in the act of dying. Filament broken in a shape that indicates whether the light was on when it met stress. It was. The glass holds, by some petty miracle, a fingerprint in powdery ghost on the inner surface, as if someone handled the bulb without ceremony. They lift it with a soft breath and a harder prayer, and the analysis prints its careful percentage language, consistent with the nephew's right ring finger, partial, insufficient alone, persuasive in chorus. The examiner circles persuasive with a pencil that has seen less cooperative cases. Persuasion is not fact until a jury agrees. Labs are not juries. Labs are mirrors. The detective with the marriage in the rear view listens to the inventory and stares at the board where the earring has been framed by string into a constellation. He remembers the nephew's hand pass, that unconscious thumb and forefinger rub, like a man recalling the size of a thing he used often in the dark. He pulls a copy of the carb diagram from the file and reads the marginalia again. Choke sticks when cold, tap to seat. He hears the nephew, in holding two, careless for a second, say, "I tapped it," and stop, the sentence sealing itself shut like a clam. You don't confess to a word, you confess to a verb. The detective writes "tapped" under the choke note and circles it until the paper threatens to tear. Back on the water, the harbor unit works the grid because rituals deserve completion. A second anomaly rings the sonar like a bell knuckled too softly. The diver goes down, fingertips reading the world. This one is smaller, a zipper pull, freed from a jacket that the tide was willing to carry but not its teeth. Up on deck under a dome of night, they photograph it, bag it, stare at it like it knows how to speak. The brand is the same discount workwear the fiber suggested. The metal is scabbed with corrosion like it got older faster out of spite. They will coax a partial profile of oil and skin from its mouth later, call it consistent with, but not irrefutable. The pile grows, the chorus strengthens. The Marina guard with the nickname Habit, the one who called everyone Captain, agrees to sit under bad lights because men at a certain age recognize duty by shape. He looks at photos of the clip-on light, the fasteners, the toolbox, and they mean nothing to him. He saw 1,000 tools do 1,000 jobs, but when he hears the payphone audio, the double gates locked, his eyes narrow, not at the voice. Voices are tricksters, but at the rhythm. Whoever said it wasn't stuck, he says. He was saying it for the page log, like he wanted a time. He leans back, and he knew we'd be asleep. The detective writes the word message, then crosses it out and writes rehearsal. The nephew's cousin, the one who left and didn't look back, calls the detectives at an hour that suggests he thought about not calling. He says there was one time the uncle showed them a trick with a work light and painter's tape, how to clip a lamp under a gunnel to see without letting the light announce you on the water. Because light on the surface is a snitch, the uncle said. It tells on you to anyone who's watching. The cousin laughs tightly. He said it like a sermon. The detective asks if the nephew was there. The cousin says yes and no, always and sometimes a student who learned faster than the teacher realized until he didn't. The reporter gets another message without a name. A location pin dropped on an old lot behind the warehouse row where cameras didn't reach in 2001 and the night collected like debt. She belongs to a century where pins can be wicked or holy. She forwards it to a cop she trusts because she's decided to trust him. The lot is ordinary in daylight. Weeds that learn to live with salt, concrete that remembers burdens. At the edge where the channel edge flirts with land, a metal post bears a bite mark under its chipped paint. The clip-on light's jaws fit like recognition. It's a small thing. It adds a spoonful to a bucket the detectives are trying to fill until it spills over and into the word proof. Elena's parents sit with a victim advocate who translates the slow gears into a language dignity can live with. The advocate knows where the ugliness will be when courtrooms begin to posture. She knows how the defense will call curiosity recklessness and tenacity trespass, how grief will be asked to do tricks like sit and stay and heal on command. She teaches the family to breathe in square counts and speaks of impact statements like psalms. The mother says she's been writing one in her head for years without knowing it. The father says nothing because the word almost has taken up residence in his throat and refuses to pay rent. At the lab, the paint from the nameboard screw whispers once more. Radon's undercoat used a pigment formula that a single Northeast supplier moved for 2 seasons in the mid-90s before a reformulation. The lab prints the supplier's order history. Kinsley bought in that window. Rowan's overpaint belongs to the later formula. The screw is a timeline that threads through 2 names and lands in the nephew's toolbox at the bottom of the channel. It's not a confession. It is a travelogue. The detective with patient eyes pulls the nephew back into holding too because time matters and also because impatience is sometimes a tool that works better than the ones you can catalog. The attorney comes along because laws are laws. The detective asks an absurd question to clear the room of pretense. When you work a choke in winter, you tap or you hold? The attorney starts to object. The nephew answers, automatic as breath. Tap. Hold drowns it. The detective nods like the weather just agreed to be cold. He doesn't press the advantage. He slides a photograph across. The clip-on light's jaws, measured, the bite on the gunnel plank in the teaching shop, the post behind the warehouse. Teeth, he says. The nephew studies it the way you study a crossword when you know the answer is obvious but hateful. He doesn't say anything. His thumb rubs his forefinger again. He measures a memory's thickness unconsciously. They have enough to carry a case into a courtroom and survive the first knife fight. They do not have Elena's last 10 minutes wrapped in a chain of custody. You never really do. The detective turns the whiteboard marker in his hand until the cap creaks. What if she found Redon? He says softly, not Rowan. The younger detective looks up. What if the name she said wasn't the present? It was the trick. The room allows the idea to take a chair. A woman who chased one old shadow stumbled into the lesson plan for a newer one. A student rehearsing after class. A toolbox let go to the bottom at 3:11, as if the water could be co-conspirator and priest. The reporter drafts a paragraph she'll keep this time. She writes that the city's waters are not an accomplice, they are a ledger. She writes that objects testify when people can't. She writes that solved and finished are not synonyms, and that closure is a ribbon the living tie on a box so they can put it away, not something the dead demand. She stares at the word solved until it looks wrong. She leaves it anyway because it is honest to the moment, even if it will be wrong later. Night returns with its usual lack of apology. The bridge watches the channel watches the city, and the city pretends not to be watched. In evidence, the earring glints, the toolbox dries, the clip-on light's filament lies broken but eloquent. The nephew goes home to a bed that won't sleep back. The uncle remains a photograph with a thumbprint of grease near the edge where someone once handled it too long. Elena's notebooks wait on a shelf that has seen everything from flowers to subpoenas. At 3:11 a.m., because some clocks are stubborn, and some stories are too, a gull laughs at nothing. A buoy knocks its single note into the air, and in the seam, where current becomes argument, the water lifts and lowers as if practicing a memory it intends to perform on command when someone finally asks the right question the right way. Morning arrives with the brittle light that makes everything look like evidence. The board has become a map of compulsion. The line from Raiden to Rowan is no longer just ink. It's a vein the case keeps tapping. They draft warrants that speak fluent hindsight, devices, bank records, the kind of paper trail men leave when they think only boats know their names. A judge signs because the folder is heavy and the prosecutor's eyes say this is not theater. The nephew's phone from 2001 is a fossil, but his provider's old tapes, kept because corporations hoard memory the way oceans do, give a scatter of billing traces that sketch his nights. He was awake when the channel sang. He was awake when Elena walked. The reporter, meanwhile, becomes fluent in catalogs and knots. She sits with a retired rigger whose fingers can still tie a bowline blindfolded and whose memory stores gossip like a pantry. He teaches her the difference between a knot tied for a load and one tied to teach, the signature snugs on the fisherman's bend that pride adds without knowing. He looks at the photo of the line from the storage unit and nods the way old men nod at the inevitable. That's a good student, he says. Trying too hard, but right. When she asks him whether a man could rig a work light to hide its honesty from the surface, he smiles a harbor smile. Any man with shame can make light lie. Evidence from the toolbox dries into confession by texture. The wire brush bristles carry micro-scratches in a pattern that mirrors the throat polish inside the carb on Rowan, tiny arcs from a left-handed sweep. The lab models them, overlays them, prints an image that looks like the grooves on a vinyl record of some song about labor and stubbornness. On the clip-on light's cord, wrapped tight like someone feared loose ends more than failure, a fragment of tape peels and reveals a strand of hair that is not synthetic. The profile is partial. The years have been unkind, but lineage pulls at it anyway. It resists, then yields a direction. A maternal line that corners the family into a smaller room. The nephew breathes somewhere without knowing the walls just leaned in an inch. The detective with patient eyes reads the lab memo and doesn't smile. He goes to the marina alone before the day remembers to be loud. He stands at the chain link and lets the salt sting eyes that have learned to stay dry. He watches a gull adjudicate trash, a jogger measure penance. A fisherman weave routine into something that looks like prayer. He closes his eyes and listens for the cough of a motor that has been dead 20 years. He hears nothing, which is when the channel always speaks best. He considers Elena's handwriting. If he taught someone, he left twice, and feels the sentence seat itself in the chair reserved for truths that will hurt. They serve a warrant on the nephew's small storage cage in a basement that sweats. Inside, a life that refused to throw much away. Old spark plugs, invoices folded until they've learned to be creases, a workbench scarred with an alphabet of impatience. There's a tackle box that smells like rain and ambition. Inside it, like a joke written in the water's hand, a second clip-on light. Newer, teeth the same profile as the one fished from the seam. They measure and match and try not to over-celebrate how well patterns behave when they're finally named. At the bottom of the box, a steel washer the size of a coin carries 2 paint halves, dark and not as dark. The lab will say consistent, the detective writes found where the heart wants to write fate. The nephew sits across from his attorney and teaches himself to be a stone. The attorney teaches him to be quiet. He fails at one and succeeds at the other. He rubs thumb to finger again, and this time the detective stops pretending not to see. What size? He asks, as if they were discussing bolts at a counter. Would you say feels right? The choke seat? The washer? Show me. The attorney says no, and the nephew keeps his hand still by violence of will. His face, anyone's face, looks like a man making choices he can't afford. The ex-reporter from '93 calls the younger reporter and says a thing he should have said earlier. We made a mistake then. We thought the doorway was the subject, it was only the frame. He faxes her a page from his notebook where a line of overheard doc talk lives. Kid learns faster than his uncle. Kid likes night. She takes it to the detective because at some point everyone picked a side and her side is called Tell It Right. The detective nods and pins the quote near the photo of the uncle's arm wrapped around a younger shoulder. The boy's chin thrust forward in the way of someone who wants to be thought older. An old ache enters the room and sits down. It could have been stopped then. Back at the teaching program, the shop teacher gives up one more relic because he can't help himself. We kept the lamp, he says, embarrassed to have hoarded the past. The clip-on they used to demonstrate under-gunnel rigging bears the same jaw print, and on its cord a strip of old mariner's tape with a date scribbled in grease pencil, 1/24/01, the day before Elena. The shop teacher laughs without joy. We teach kids to keep records, he says. The city rarely does. The lab will test the tape like it was skin. A call comes in that carries winter with it. A woman in Quincy who dated the nephew briefly in 2000 has a memory that dented and then smoothed as memories do, until the news on television made it sharp again. He took me to see the water at night, she says. He said he liked watching engines try to decide if they wanted to live. He said if you listened right, the channel threw your voice back with the truth taken out. She laughs at herself for calling. The detective does not laugh. He thanks her and writes the sentence down whole because sometimes poetry is just a man confessing without knowing the word for it. The prosecutor convenes a meeting around a long table that has endured 1,000 arguments. She walks them through the gospel according to admissibility. Genealogy will be attacked. They will answer with warrants that stand on their own legs. Paint chemistry will be called specialty. They will humanize it by showing the screw that tells time by pigment. The earring will speak first. The toolbox will sing harmony. The knot will conduct. The prosecutor asks the question trials are built on. What is the story? The detective answers without dramatic flourish because drama is what liars use. A student practicing, he says. A teacher who thought changing a name could save a hull. A woman who found the frame around an older crime and got seen for knowing. The nephew's cousin, the one who left, returns to the diner because conscience is a boomerang. He brings with him a photograph he said he'd thrown away. In it, the uncle is teaching the kid to clip a work light under a gunnel at dusk. The light's jaws imprint a dent into raw wood that matches the teaching program's plank and the postbite near the warehouse. He said it was so no one saw the glow, the cousin murmurs. Even the water. You don't want the water telling on you, he said. The cousin stares at his coffee as if it could absolve. I thought it was clever. I was 19. 19 is just a longer way of saying stupid. At Municipal Records, the clerk with the sarcasm armor coughs up one more misfile. Building permits tied to the storage unit property in '98 mention a security camera installation that never worked right, but stored a few weeks of frames to tape. No one ever pulled them. The tape shakes like a nervous hand when they play it. The frames are time-lapse ghosts. But on the week of Elena's death, a figure steps into the unit row at 2:55 a.m., carries a toolbox that sags his shoulder down into a familiar lean, and disappears into the mouth of a unit with a number that now belongs to a different man's boxes. At 3:19, he returns without the box. The camera doesn't know names. It knows posture. The detective runs the tape again until posture and possibility rhyme. Defense will say coincidence. The detective writes chorus. On the whiteboard, he draws the seam of current twice as dark as before. He adds a small square where the sonar found the toolbox. He adds a second circle around the payphone, then an arrow to the override log at 3:07, a man announcing his presence but not asking permission, a rehearsal performed for an audience of paperwork. He writes the word ritual and leaves it there. Too pretentious? Maybe, but sometimes pretension is just the right word, wearing its clean shirt. The reporter files a piece that refuses to be about heroism and refuses to be about monsters. She writes about craft, the way harm can be built like furniture, measured, sanded, made to fit. She writes about how Elena recognized craft and paid in coin the city never wants to count. Her editor asks for more quotes. She gives them the water instead. The comment section loves and hates her in equal rounds because that is what comment sections do when you point at the seam where a city is honest. Sundown throws copper at the channel. The detective with the marriage in the rear view leans on the rail and lets the cold eat his fingers. He is not thinking about triumph. He is thinking about instruction, all the hours men spend passing down their little expertise, and what happens when the skill isn't plumbing or carpentry but concealment. He thinks of Elena's notebooks, her own curriculum, and how she died for attending the wrong class at the right hour. He thinks of the nephew's thumb rubbing history like he could make it smooth. The arrest warrant for murder goes to a judge with a reputation for hating sloppy work. It's not sloppy. It's a staircase. The judge reads and reads again and signs because abundance can be its own kind of purity. They don't do the raid in darkness because they are not performing. They do it in mourning, with coats and courtesy and hands firm enough to say this is real. The nephew opens the door with a face that has learned not to advertise. He offers his wrists as if they are a foregone conclusion. He glances past the detective out toward where the city keeps its water, and for a second the detective thinks he sees gratitude there, as if some men only exhale at the moment the story stops, making them keep the secret. They walk him down a hall that smells like cleaning fluid and decision. Cameras are outside because the city loves to watch itself reckon. Elena's parents do not attend. They don't need the picture. The attorney speaks into microphones with the pained civility of a man who knows what is coming and can only shave its edges. The reporter keeps her notebook down at her side like a weapon she refuses to draw unless it's necessary. The detective with patient eyes looks at the niece of a gull perched on a courthouse light and hears, absurdly, the cough of a dead motor. In evidence, under that gentle lamp that pretends mercy, the earring glints again, the same as it did the first night. It doesn't know about radon and Rowan and rituals and override logs. It knows a simple thing. Someone's skin met its surface at a time when kindness had left the building. It will say so in a room with a seal on the wall and a jury trying to decide whether to believe in the misericord of objects. The toolbox will help it. The knot will nod. The screw will tell time like a sundial under a noon sky. At 3:11 a.m., because this story belongs to that minute the way a scar belongs to a body, the channel inhales like it is counting. The city hums on the surface with late buses and early lives. Underneath, the seam keeps its promise to remember. The detectives, sleeping badly or sitting in dark kitchens with cups that have forgotten heat, feel that minute pass the way you feel an old injury when the weather changes. The reporter wakes from a dream in which solvent lifts letters from wood and spells something that isn't a name but feels like one. And somewhere in the city, the nephew stares at a ceiling that has decided to be a mirror and sees not a monster, not a martyr, not even a mechanic, just a student who learned exactly what he was taught and now cannot pretend he didn't. The arraignment is theater that pretends it isn't. Marble murmurs, a clock that keeps everyone honest. The nephew stands where men stand when the city decides to speak as one. He pleads not guilty with a voice that could be ordering parts. The prosecutor answers with the weight of objects. The judge ticks boxes only judges can see. Outside, microphones flower on stems and drink the air for outrage. Headlines rehearse their lines. Boston, 2001, cold case solved, while the defense files papers that comb the word solved backward looking for split ends. Downstairs in a conference room that smells like carpet and copy toner, the team rehearses what a jury will be allowed to hear. The earring leads, DNA that doesn't care for rhetoric. The toolbox follows from the seam of water like a choir that finally found its note. The clip-on light and its bitten gunnel, the knot with its pride-tight signature, the screw that tells paint as biography, the carburetor throat polished with a left-handed impatience. The prosecutor arranges them on a table the way curators arrange artifacts and says, "Objects testify, people explain." She looks at the detectives. We will not explain when an object can testify. The defense sketches its counter-epic in motions, suppress the genealogy, poison on the tree, diminish the paint chemistry, alchemy, not science. Call the toolbox contamination, the channel's hand on everything. Their expert witnesses will speak in polysyllables and frown at the word consistent as if it were an insult. They will pinch the word rehearsal into coincidence, ritual into routine, instruction into innocent mentorship. Good defense work is a mirror held too close. The prosecutor flips through her tabs and chooses a kindness of tone sharp enough to cut. We aren't on trial for a perfect night, she says. We're here for the sum. The reporter writes around the edges because the center is in custody. She sits in an empty pew and drafts a paragraph about the way a city asks a jury to hold its dead in their hands and not drop anything. She lets the paragraph go, too tender, her editor would say, and replaces it with iron, timeline, objects, names. A note hums under the story anyway. Elena's notebooks, her arrows from Charlestown doorway to Rowan to storage to call Wednesday. The ex-reporter from 93 calls to ask if she remembers in her bones where the story prefers to lie. She says yes and keeps writing toward the hard edge. Jury selection becomes its own weather. People who have lived here long enough to smell a nor'easter coming line up to say they can be fair. They say they can ignore the word solved and listen for proof like music. A woman with a teacher's posture admits she knows knots and bias in equal measure. A man who installs HVAC confesses that he can't stop thinking about a toolbox in the dark, about what men throw away when they think the bottom loves them. The defense strikes cleverly. The prosecution keeps the ones who understand the moral voice of objects. Elena's parents sit behind the rail as if it were a shoreline and they were choosing not to drown. The victim advocate works small miracles, timing breaks with breaths, robbing the brutal with ritual. The mother keeps the matchbook in her pocket because talismans are allowed in rooms where rules are otherwise strict. The father stares at the nephew without flinching, practices not hating in a public space, fails, starts again. He has learned that grief is a manual you rewrite every day with a dull pencil. Discovery shakes loose a custodial secret. In an old marina invoice box, an envelope tucked beneath customs declarations holds a strip of photos from a cheap camera, work light rigs under gunnels, mouths of lockers, a name board mid-sanding with RAD showing like a bruise. The timestamp is a liar. Cameras like that never told the truth, but the paper stock dates to the year the boat changed names. On the second frame, a hand enters from the left, steadying the plank. A scar across the second knuckle walks like the uncle's. On the third, a smaller hand grips the same edge with that unconscious thumb to forefinger measure. You can't print hands, you can show them. The prosecutor lifts the strip with tweezers. The room holds its breath, and the law clerk writes another tab, pedagogy. The nephew's past gets dusted for fingerprints of habit. Purchase records show the same discount jacket bought twice in 2 years. Polishing compound in his basement bench matches the grain of the carb throat. A receipt from the supply house for rope fasteners sits beside an unrelated lunch run and shows the same swipe pattern, the same board cashier initials. The defense will say errands, errands, errands. The prosecutor whispers to the board, to the channel, to Elena's looping script, patterns. The judge rules on the genealogy with the gravity of precedent. Allowed, he says, because the warrant that followed could stand on its own legs and walk. The defense frowns in a way that reads as polite outrage. They will pivot. They will talk sentiment, contamination, coincidence. The prosecutor replies with the tone of a tide chart, regular, inevitable, unbothered by adjectives. Night drapes the courthouse. The channel keeps its liturgy. At 3:11 a.m., a patrol car idles on the bridge as if paying respects. The diver from the harbor unit dreams of bottom maps like cathedrals. The reporter wakes with a sentence in her mouth. Solved is not finished. She writes it down even though it is a drum she has beaten before. Some drums are meant to be beaten until callus forms. Trial day 1 arrives with cameras and cold. The clerk sings the opening measures, the case called, the oath administered, the stenographer's hands turning human voice into fossil. The prosecutor stands like someone who plans to lift a heavy box properly. Knees bent, back straight, no showing off. Her opening is simple because angles can be traps. You will hear from objects, she says. You will see a line taught from a boat to a dock to a door. You will hold an earring that was held by the defendant at the time Elena Ward was attacked. You will see the bottom of our city give back what it was asked to hide. She does not say 3:11. The room says it for her in heartbeats. The defense rises like an apology and then becomes something harder. He says teaching and tools and water are not crimes. He holds up a scapular of doubt and invites the jury to touch it. He says the city wants a shape for its grief and has poured objects into a mold that fits its anger. He calls the nephew a man who works with his hands and is being punished for it. He says the word contamination until the syllables feel like foam. Objects begin. The earring, removed from its bag with the tenderness reserved for relics, testifies in a technician's steady voice. Chain of custody, swabs, controls, sequences that did not exist in 2001 now singing in chorus. The nephew's DNA deposit matched with a margin of error polite enough to dress for court. The defense tries to turn the clock backward, unknown handling, casual contact, but the object keeps looking like what it is, personal, intimate, inarguable in its proximity. The toolbox takes the stand carried by a detective who has practiced how not to look at the nephew while speaking. The story of the seam, the sonar's square geometry, the diver's hand on plastic that had decided to be stone, the clip-on light's bite, measured against the teaching plank and the post, the miniature archaeology of paint on a single screw. Science phrases, consistent, likely indicative, stacked until they achieve a mass that behaves like certainty. The defense calls it coincidence archaeology. The jury looks at the overlay of jaw marks and blinks as one. The knot comes next, but it never really arrives. It's an idea with rope wrapped around it. The rigor shows the fisherman's bend, the pride snug, the way instruction turns into signature in the hands. He ties it with his eyes closed and then ties it wrong on purpose to show you what ignorance looks like. He points to the storage unit line photo and nods like a man agreeing with the weather. The defense asks him if 1,000 men in this city couldn't tie the same knot. They could, he says, but this one tried too hard. Laughter wants to enter. The judge denies it entry. The sentence lingers anyway, heavier than wit. A surprise arrives from the warehouse row nobody owned in 2001. An owner's ledger found during a renovation. Cash down, no names, just dates and a weird insistence on time. 307 scrawled twice in the margin beside a gate note, circled as if the minute itself were a password. The prosecutor doesn't overplay it. She lets the circle sit under the document camera while the room measures coincidence against habit. The tape from '93, anonymous voice talking about lean and lie, does not come in for truth but for effect on a listener. The reporter testifies to its chain from closet to courtroom. The judge allows a sliver under hearsay rules because it explains why Elena circled her map the way she did. A posture, a sound, a boat with a cough, and a name that changed from Radon to Rowan like a man changes coats. The defense objects to ghosts on tape. The judge sustains twice, overrules once, and the jury hears the tiny cough of an engine through a layer of hiss that sounds like time itself. On cross, the defense asks the detective if he believes in ritual. The room tilts as if a sudden squall has come through a door someone forgot to close. The detective says he believes in repetition, in muscle memory, in how men become what they practice. He says he believes in timestamps men leave when they want to be seen by logs and not by people. He looks at the nephew and does not look again. The defense pivots to love of boats. The detective replies with the truth that hurts both sides. This was love of control. Midweek, the judge gives the jury the afternoon off because brains, like engines, flood if you hold instead of tap. The courtroom empties into corridors where coffee is a sacrament and everyone pretends not to speak about verdicts that are still somewhere out on the water. The reporter sits on the courthouse steps and watches a gull study a pretzel as if it were a puzzle. The ex-reporter joins her without asking if the seat is taken. Doorways, he says, and she nods. Frames, she answers, and he nods back. That night, the channel breathes like a lung the city borrowed. The diver sits on his stoop with a beer that tastes like Old Victory and hears the cough of a phantom motor, not because ghosts are real, but because rituals are. The detective with patient eyes looks again at Elena's scrawl. If he taught someone, he left twice, and understands it now as instruction for the jury. Follow the leaving. The mother writes her impact statement in a notebook that used to belong to a daughter who wrote everything down. She borrows the cadence and does not apologize. The father sharpens a pencil until it is a spear and then sets it gently on the table like a truce. Morning returns to find the court ready for the channel to speak in a different language. Paint chemists and filament physics, name boards and procurement ledgers that accidentally wrote a diary. The nephew watches all of it with a face that wants to be a wall. When the prosecutor holds up the wire brush and reads from the carb diagram, choke sticks when cold. Tap to seat, he blinks once at the word tap, like a bell someone rang behind his eyes. The jury notices because they have been taught to be a collective noticing. The reporter writes nothing just then. Some things you keep until the end because you need them more later. At 3:11 a.m., because of course the city inhales. Upstairs, lights sleep in their sockets. Down at the water, a buoy hits its note, faithful as a metronome. Evidence rests behind locked doors. Words settle like silt. Tomorrow will bring cross-examination that tries to turn objects into adjectives. Tonight belongs to the seam and to a woman whose notebooks outlined a map the law is only now learning to read. Solved, the city whispers to itself again. Finished, the channel refuses to say. Cross-examination arrives like weather the forecast warned about but nobody prepared for. The defense rises with pages that whisper when he turns them, and he starts where doubt loves to live. Contamination. He asks the lab tech whether air itself can be a thief, whether time smudges sequences, whether a gloved hand 20 years ago could have been the wrong kind of careful. The tech answers in the grammar of protocols and blanks and controls, a litany that sounds like prayer if you believe and noise if you don't. The defense nods as if granted a favor and moves on to the toolbox, a tourist of coincidence. A box in a tide. A city that throws its hardware away. A finder with a good story. He holds up the clip-on light as if it were a prop and not a verb. Bite marks, he says, and rolls his eyes toward metaphor without looking long enough to indulge it. What if the world is full of jaws that look alike? The prosecutor doesn't object. She waits. Object, then explain. That's the order she promised herself. When it's her turn again, she doesn't preach the uniqueness of teeth. She lays the overlays on the projector and lets the jury draw their own outlines. The jaw that bit the teaching plank, the jaw that bit the post by the warehouse, the jaw that bit the light fished from the seam. The mouth matches the mouth and says its long syllable quietly, same. The defense rolls out a witness with a degree in a tie that hopes you'll relax. An expert who speaks fluent suggest. He calls the left-handed tool slip not diagnostic, then smiles at the word like it has disappointed him personally. Plenty of right-handed men err left, he offers, a sentence that lands like a shrug. He gestures at the knot. A fisherman's bend is a populist knot. He pronounces populist the way some men pronounce pity. He waves at paint chemistry. Batches vary. Storage ages pigment. Who can say what a screw knows? The jury stares through him toward the board where the screw's timeline has been clipped like a clothesline hung with years. The prosecutor writes one word under her notes. Chorus. The nephew watches with the posture of a man learning how to be furniture. The thumb to forefinger rub has slowed but not died. On the table, a cup sweats without being touched. When the clerk calls for the mid-morning break, he looks toward the hallway as if it might open into a garage. It doesn't. He looks instead at the gallery and finds the mother's eyes on him. He doesn't flinch. He gray rocks. He becomes the kind of absence men mistake for strength. The father lowers his gaze, then raises it, then breathes like someone learning to swim at an age when swimming should have been a given. The reporter spends the recess in a corridor that smells like old air and bottled water, texting the ex-reporter from 93. He answers with a single sentence that feels like a lever. Ask the marina about the gate battery. She does. The clerk with sarcasm armor picks up on the second ring and laughs that tired laugh again. Replaced in late January 001, she says, shuffling paper audibly. New unit. Old one kept dying at night. The reporter asks for the work order and gets the rustle of triumph. Here, stamped 125. Note says fails between 3 and 4 a.m. Draining load somewhere on circuit. She hands the phone to the prosecutor's investigator like passing a relay baton on a course you can only run once. Back in court, the investigator takes the stand with the work order in his pocket and the electrician's handwriting under document camera. Fails between 3 and 4 a.m. Draining load somewhere on circuit. The prosecutor's face doesn't gloat, it breathes. What would drain a gate battery on a cold night when no one used the gate, she asks. The investigator doesn't guess. He lists possibilities and then ticks one gently. A light left clipped under a gunnel, pulling on the same circuit the gate shares. He doesn't say Rowan. He doesn't say radon. He doesn't have to. The room draws the line itself. The defense objects to speculation. The judge trims the sentence but keeps the noun. The electrician who wrote the note is retired to Florida and appears by video, sun in his blinds, memory stubborn. He remembers the guard who called everyone captain, remembers the weirdness of a battery that died on nights with tide high, remembers telling the marina to check the subcircuits and clean up whoever was stealing power like it was free. He shrugs into the camera. It stopped after we swapped the unit and rerouted a leg. January 25th, 2 nights after Elena. The jury leans in as a flock. The earring, the toolbox, the bite marks, the carb throat, the knot, the screw, the battery, objects learning to sing together. The reporter writes one line and then scratches it out because it sounds like hero worship. The city's hardware is a choir. Instead, she writes the colder thing. Proof likes company. Afternoon brings the uncle's ghost into the room without violating any law of hearsay. A neighbor from the row houses near the marina sits in the witness chair, like someone who has taken a comfortable seat on an uncomfortable bench. She remembers the uncle's cap and habit, the struts of a walk that ate distance quietly, the way he said evening like it was a warning. Sometimes, she says, he had a kid with him. The kid watched his hands. The defense asks if she can be sure the kid is the man in court. She answers no. There were many boys then. But that kid, she says, carried his shoulders like he'd been told not to take up space. She glances at the nephew's posture, and the jury follows the glance. The lab returns to the witness stand with a filament lesson no one asked to learn, but everyone must. The bulb from the clip-on light reveals whether it broke hot or cold. The little tulip of molten line tells tales. It broke hot. The physics say the light was on when the glass met stress. The stress could be a fall, a yank, a shock of water meeting heat. The lab doesn't assume, it defines. The defense calls it theater. The prosecutor says electricity loves objectivity. The judge raises a brow that says the court will decide which word wins. After court, the detective with patient eyes walks to the bridge because ritual is not superstition when it's the only way you know how to breathe. The channel is a sheet of hammered metal under a pewter sky. He leans his forearms on the rail and thinks of Elena's handwriting, the arrows, the Wednesday, the if he taught someone. And he hears the line of the electrician's note merge with it like two pages held up to the same light. Circuit drain, clip-on light, 3 to 4 a.m. He turns and sees the reporter at the far end, also pretending not to be looking for omens. He raises a hand. She raises hers. City, witnesses, accomplices. The next morning, the defense calls its own diver. A man with shoulders like a pier says currents move things you don't expect in ways no one can map. He charts the seam like a serpent and asks the jury to imagine a toolbox knocked from a shelf of silt a decade after it was dropped and sliding until it found the square geometry by accident. Bottoms are dishonest, he says, even honest ones. He's not wrong, and the harbor unit diver in the gallery nods because truth knows itself, even when it testifies for the other side. The prosecutor counters by showing the camera tape from the storage facility, a figure entering with a box at 2:55 and leaving empty at 3:19. She asks the diver if the bottom lies about time. He smiles and says no. The jury smiles back without meaning to. Midweek, the judge allows a limited site visit. The jury puts on coats of civic duty and steps onto the bridge in a wind that eats microphones. They look down at the seam where current swaps allegiance. The detective points without pointing. He talks about distances and minutes. He keeps the poetry in his throat. A gull banks in a curve that seems rehearsed. The jurors stand at the payphone's old corner, now occupied by a tasteful trash can that never does its job, and the prosecutor plays the 302 call. Gates locked. Gates locked. It's tinny in daylight. The jurors file it under sound, not spectacle. They walk the length to the gate and back to where Elena's last word carried simply, Rowan. The foreperson tilts her head like someone listening for math. That night, Elena's mother rehearses the paragraph she intends to read if the moment arrives that asks for it. She chooses not to weaponize grief. She chooses to catalog absence. The father writes names that aren't Elena's. The detectives, the diver, the clerk who found the work order, because gratitude is a form of control that doesn't harm anyone. He underlines channel as if the water could be thanked. He tears the page out and starts again because he accidentally wrote a prayer and doesn't know what to do with that. The prosecutor keeps one card for late in her case because timing is a screwdriver. Right tool, wrong moment, you strip the head. She calls the teaching program's shop, teacher, back to the stand. He brings the plank with the bite under chain of custody like a strange baseball bat. Under a document camera, he points to a faint graphite scrawl near the bite, eraser smudged, almost insulted by time. The lab dusted it and read it in oblique light, RW. Someone started to write a name and stopped. The date on the mariner's tape still stitched to the teaching lamp, 1/24/01. Who wrote those letters? The prosecutor asks. The shop teacher shakes his head. Kids, volunteers, could be anyone. The prosecutor nods as if she expected nothing more ambitious. Could a left-handed writer make them angle that way? The teacher, who grades handwriting like builds, glances, nods slowly. The defense objects to penmanship as sorcery. The judge sustains. The image of those half letters remains anyway like a half-closed eye on the wall. The defense tries a turn onto character. They call a man who says the nephew once fixed his outboard for free, stayed late, returned the boat better than he found it. The jury writes nothing. The prosecutor rises and asks the man whether the nephew loved the water. He says yes, and she thanks him because love is not a defense when it's love of control. She lets the sentence hang long enough to absorb. Late afternoon, the clerk from Municipal Records takes the stand and becomes the city's conscience. She walks the jury through misfiles that were miracles, gate logs and utilities, camera tapes behind Christmas, invoices under customs, and she doesn't brag about having found them. She rolls her eyes at the bureaucracy that hid them. The jury laughs, properly this time. The judge smiles with teeth pressed together. The city's paper body blushes in public. The prosecutor asks how often misfiles happen. The clerk answers, often enough to call it habit. The reporter writes that line down whole and underlines